Hello everyone. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The curtains twitched again. Just a slight movement, but I saw it. My new neighbor, always watching. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Now, I'm not so sure. I never wanted to be the paranoid type, you know? The kind of person who sees danger lurking around every corner. But ever since Tom moved in next door, I can't shake this feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something's not right. It started innocently enough. Tom seemed friendly when he first arrived, waving as he unloaded boxes from his beat-up pickup truck. I even brought over a casserole, trying to be a good neighbor. That's when I first noticed it. The way his eyes darted around my living room, taking in every detail, like he was memorizing it. "Nice place you've got here," he said, his gaze lingering a bit too long on the family photos on my mantel. "You live alone?" I hesitated, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I felt. "No, my husband's just at work," I lied, forcing a smile. "He'll be home soon." Tom nodded, but something in his expression told me he didn't buy it. As I ushered him out, I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing Tom more and more. He was always there, puttering in his yard when I left for work, taking out the trash when I came home. Once, I woke up at 3 a.m. and saw him standing in his driveway, just staring at my house. Who does that? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he worked odd hours. Maybe he was just a night owl. But the excuses were wearing thin, especially when I started noticing other things, like the way my garden gnome kept moving. I know it sounds silly, but I swear that little ceramic guy was in a different spot every morning. And then there were the noises, soft creaks and thuds coming from the basement at night, like someone was down there, moving around. I started double-checking my locks, keeping the curtains drawn, but it didn't help. I could still feel those eyes on me, watching, waiting. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to do a little investigating of my own. I crept downstairs, careful to avoid the creaky step second from the bottom. The basement door was closed, as always, but something made me pause. A faint smell, like damp earth and something else I couldn't quite place. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and slowly turned it. The hinges creaked as the door swung open, revealing the darkness beyond. I fumbled for the light switch, my heart pounding in my chest. The fluorescent bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the cluttered space. Everything looked normal at first. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old furniture, the usual basement stuff. But then I saw it, a small patch of disturbed dirt in the corner, partially hidden behind an old bookshelf. I moved closer, my curiosity overriding my fear. As I pushed the bookshelf aside, I gasped. There, in the exposed earth, was a crude tunnel. It was small, maybe 2 feet in diameter, disappearing into the darkness beyond my basement wall. My mind raced. How was this possible? When did this happen? And then, with a sickening clarity, I realized where it must lead. Next door, to Tom's house. I stumbled backward, my legs suddenly weak. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare. But the earthy smell filling my nostrils told me it was all too real. I ran upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. My hands shook as I dialed 911, but I froze before pressing call. What would I tell them? That my creepy neighbor dug a tunnel into my basement? It sounded insane. They'd think I was crazy. I paced the living room, trying to decide what to do. Should I confront Tom? No, that seemed too dangerous. Maybe I could fill in the tunnel, pretend I never saw it. But even as I considered it, I knew that wouldn't solve the real problem. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. I threw some clothes in a bag, grabbed my important documents, and headed for the door. I'd go to my sister's place, figure things out from there, but as I stepped outside, my heart sank. Tom was there, watering his lawn in the pale morning light. He looked up as I emerged, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his eyes flicking to my hastily packed bag. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just heading to visit my sister for a few days." He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Drive safe," he said, turning back to his yard, but I could feel his gaze on my back as I walked to my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Tom was still there, watching, always watching. I drove for hours, my mind replaying every interaction with Tom, every odd occurrence since he moved in. How long had he been planning this? What was his endgame? When I finally arrived at my sister's place, I broke down. Through tears, I told her everything, the watching, the noises, the tunnel. To her credit, she didn't think I was crazy. She held me as I cried, assuring me we'd figure it out together. We called the police, who agreed to check out my house. But when they arrived, they found nothing. The tunnel was gone, filled in as if it had never existed. Tom played the part of the confused, concerned neighbor perfectly. Without any evidence, there was nothing they could do. I couldn't go back there. My sister insisted I stay with her, at least until we could figure out what to do next. But even here, miles away, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time the phone rings, my heart races. Every knock at the door makes me jump. I keep expecting to see Tom's face, that same slow smile spreading across his lips. It's been weeks now, and I'm no closer to understanding what happened. Was it all in my head? Did I imagine the whole thing? But then I remember the smell of damp earth, the sight of that crude tunnel disappearing into darkness. No, it was real. I'm sure of it. I've started researching Tom, trying to find out more about him. But it's like he appeared out of nowhere. No social media presence, no records I can find. It's like he's a ghost. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself staring out the window, scanning the street for any sign of him. I know it's irrational. He can't have followed me here. But the fear has taken root, growing like a weed in my mind. I've thought about moving, starting fresh somewhere new. But the idea of being alone again, vulnerable, terrifies me. What if Tom finds me? What if there are others like him out there? For now, I'm stuck in this limbo. Unable to go home, afraid to start over. I jump at every shadow, flinch at every unexpected sound. The world feels dangerous in a way it never did before. But I won't let Tom win. I'm going to figure out who he is, what he wanted, and I'm going to make sure he can never do this to anyone else. Because the thought that keeps me up at night isn't just about what happened to me. It's the question that haunts me. If Tom's done this before, what happened to the others who came before me? I don't have the answers yet, but I'm going to find them, no matter what it takes, because I refuse to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if today's the day Tom finally decides to do more than just watch. So, if you're out there, Tom, know this. I'm not your victim. I'm not going to disappear quietly. You wanted to get inside my head? Congratulations. You did. But now I'm in yours too. And I'm not going anywhere until I uncover the truth. The game isn't over. It's only just begun. The sound of splintering wood jolted me awake. For a moment, I lay frozen in the unfamiliar bed, my heart pounding. Then I heard it again, a slow, deliberate creak coming from downstairs. Someone was inside the cabin. I'd come here to escape, to find some peace in the solitude of the woods. Now, as I stared into the darkness, I realized I might have made a terrible mistake. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway. After months of grueling overtime and the messy end of a 5-year relationship, I desperately needed a break. When I found the listing for a secluded cabin rental, it seemed perfect. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me and the great outdoors. The drive up had been beautiful, all winding roads and autumn foliage. As I pulled up to the cabin, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease. It was exactly as advertised, a cozy log structure nestled in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. The owner, a gruff older man named Bill, met me with the keys. "It's all yours for the week," he said, handing them over. "Just remember, you're on your own out here. Nearest neighbor's 5 miles away." At the time, that sounded ideal. Now, as I lay paralyzed with fear, those words took on a sinister new meaning. I'd spent the first day settling in, exploring the cabin and the surrounding woods. It was peaceful, the silence broken only by birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. As night fell, I built a fire in the old stone fireplace and curled up with a book, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. That peace was shattered now. Another creak. Closer this time. They were coming up the stairs. My mind raced. What do I do? There was no phone to call for help, no way to signal the outside world. I was truly alone. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my bare feet silent on the rough wooden floor. The bedroom door was closed. Small mercy. But for how long? I glanced around frantically, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a heavy brass lamp on the bedside table. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Clutching the lamp, I pressed my ear to the door. The floorboards in the hallway groaned under the weight of slow, measured footsteps. They paused just outside. I held my breath, willing my thundering heart to quiet. A bead of sweat trickled down my back. Please, I thought, please just go away. The doorknob began to turn. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I yanked the door open and swung the lamp with all my might. It connected with a sickening thud. There was a grunt of pain, and a dark figure stumbled backward. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted past them, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I hit the ground floor running, making a beeline for the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, precious seconds ticking by. Behind me, I could hear heavy footsteps descending the stairs. The lock finally gave way. I wrenched the door open and plunged into the night. The forest was a different world in the darkness. Branches whipped at my face as I ran blindly, fueled by pure adrenaline. I had no idea where I was going. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and the cabin as possible. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. The woods were silent save for my ragged breathing. Had I lost them? Or were they out there somewhere, hunting me? As my pulse slowly steadied, reality began to set in. I was alone in the forest, in the middle of the night, wearing nothing but a t-shirt and shorts. No shoes, no phone, no idea which direction led to safety. The autumn air, so pleasant during the day, now chilled me to the bone. I couldn't stay here. I had to find help, or at least shelter until dawn. But which way? A twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, peering into the gloom. Was that a shadow moving between the trees, or just my imagination? I didn't wait to find out. I took off again, no longer caring about the noise I made. Better to be heard than caught. The forest seemed endless. Every tree looked the same in the dark. I was hopelessly lost, and the growing ache in my feet told me I couldn't keep running forever. Just as despair began to set in, I saw it, a faint glow through the trees. A light. My heart leapt. Maybe it was a house or a road. Either way, it meant people, safety. I pushed toward it, ignoring the pain as rocks and twigs dug into my bare feet. The light grew brighter. I burst through a line of bushes, ready to cry with relief, and found myself back at the cabin. No, it couldn't be. I must have run in a circle. But as I stood there, panting and shivering, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door, which I'd left wide open in my frantic escape, was now closed. They were waiting for me. For a long moment, I just stood there, paralyzed with indecision. I couldn't go back in there, but I couldn't survive a night in the woods, either. I was trapped. A floorboard creaked inside the cabin, then another. They were coming to the door. In that moment, I made a choice. I darted around the side of the cabin, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around a rusted garden rake leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I pressed myself against the rough logs, trying to slow my breathing. The front door opened with a drawn-out groan. "I know you're out there," a voice called. Male, unfamiliar. No point in hiding. "Why don't you come on back inside? We've got a lot to talk about." I gripped the rake tighter, my palms slick with sweat. Fat chance, buddy. Footsteps crunched on gravel, coming around the side of the cabin. This was it. My one shot. As a shadowy figure emerged from around the corner, I swung the rake with every ounce of strength I had left. It connected with a satisfying thwack, followed by a howl of pain. I didn't wait to see the damage. I bolted past the figure, now doubled over and cursing, and sprinted for the tree line. "Stop!" the voice yelled behind me. "You don't understand." Yeah, right. I wasn't falling for that. I plunged back into the woods, my bare feet somehow finding purchase on the uneven ground. This time, I paid attention to my surroundings. I picked a direction and stuck to it, pushing through exhaustion and pain. The sky was starting to lighten. Dawn wasn't far off. If I could just hold out until then. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin. I caught glimpses of open sky through the branches, and then, miraculously, I heard a sound that made me want to weep with joy, the distant rumble of a car engine. I burst out of the forest onto the shoulder of a road. In the pre-dawn light, I could make out a pair of headlights approaching in the distance. I waved my arms frantically, praying they'd see me. The car slowed, then pulled over. An older couple peered out at me with concerned faces. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance. I shook my head, tears of relief streaming down my face. "No," I managed to croak. "I need help. Please." They ushered me into the back seat, wrapping me in a blanket they had stashed there. As we drove toward the nearest town, I haltingly explained what had happened. The couple exchanged worried glances. "We need to call the police," the man said, reaching for his phone. I nodded, finally feeling safe for the first time in hours. But as I watched the forest recede in the rearview mirror, a nagging thought tugged at the back of my mind. Who was that man? What did he want? And why did he say I didn't understand? I pushed the questions aside. They were for the police to figure out now. All that mattered was that I had survived. But in the days and weeks that followed, as the police investigation turned up more questions than answers, those thoughts would return to haunt me. The cabin's owner, Bill, swore he hadn't rented it to anyone else. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder beyond my own frantic testimony. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if it really happened at all. If maybe the solitude and stress had caused me to imagine the whole thing. But then I looked down at my feet, still bearing the scars from that desperate flight through the forest, and I know the truth. Something happened in those woods. Something I may never fully understand. One thing's for certain, though. I'll never go to a secluded cabin alone again. Some peace and quiet just isn't worth the risk. The package sat on my doorstep, innocuous and brown. I hadn't ordered anything. As I picked it up, a chill ran down my spine. Inside was a crumpled receipt from last week's grocery run, something I'd tossed in the trash days ago. I'm not the kind of person who usually jumps to conclusions. I like to think I'm pretty level-headed, actually. But when you're a college student living alone for the first time, It's hard not to let your imagination run wild sometimes. It started small. A few weeks into the fall semester, I noticed some of my stuff wasn't quite where I'd left it. My favorite mug would be in a different cabinet, or my textbooks rearranged on my desk. Nothing major, just little things that made me pause and wonder if I was going crazy. I chalked it up to stress and lack of sleep. Midterms were coming up, and I was pulling all-nighters left and right. It was probably just my sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me. But then the packages started arriving. The first one showed up on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten back from my morning psychology lecture, my head still spinning with Freudian theories. There it was, a small brown box with my name and address neatly printed on the label. I brought it inside, curiosity overriding any sense of caution. When I opened it, I froze. Inside was an empty coffee cup, the same brand I'd gotten from the campus cafe that morning. I'd thrown it away in a trash can outside the psych building. My heart started racing. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? Maybe a friend was playing a prank. But as I turned the cup over in my hands, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Written on the bottom in black marker was a message. You should try the vanilla latte next time. It's better than the hazelnut. I dropped the cup like it had burned me. How did they know what I'd ordered? How did they get this? I spent the rest of the day looking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise. But nothing else happened. By the time I went to bed that night, I'd almost convinced myself it was just a weird coincidence. Then the second package arrived. This one contained a crumpled flyer for a party I'd considered going to over the weekend. I remembered balling it up and tossing it in the trash outside my dorm. Now here it was, smoothed out and accompanied by another note. You should have gone. You might have had fun. That's when the real panic set in. Someone was watching me. Someone was going through my trash, following me around campus, tracking my every move. I went to campus security, but they didn't take me seriously. Without any real evidence of a threat, they said there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I be more careful about what I threw away and to let them know if anything else happened. But things kept happening. Every few days, a new package would show up. Each one contained something I'd discarded, old assignments, food wrappers, even a shirt I'd donated to a campus clothing drive. And always those notes, sometimes encouraging, sometimes critical, but always unsettlingly personal. That B on your English paper, you can do better. I liked the red sweater. Why'd you get rid of it? You've been skipping breakfast. That's not healthy. I started changing my routine, taking different routes to class, varying where I ate lunch. I stopped throwing anything away on campus, bringing all my trash home to dispose of. But it didn't matter. The packages kept coming. My friends started to notice something was wrong. I'd become jumpy, paranoid. I stopped going out, afraid of what might show up in a package if I did. When they asked what was wrong, I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I, without sounding completely insane? One night, about a month into this nightmare, I hit my breaking point. I'd been up late studying, mainlining coffee to stay awake. When I finally crawled into bed around 3 a.m., I heard a noise outside my window. I froze, barely breathing, straining to listen. There it was again, a soft scraping sound, like someone was out there. Slowly, I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. What I saw made my heart stop. A figure was crouched by my trash cans, rifling through the bags I'd put out for collection. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, they pulled something out, an empty energy drink can I'd tossed earlier that night. I must have made a noise, a gasp or a whimper, because suddenly the figure looked up. Our eyes met through the window, and for a split second, I saw their face in the glow of the streetlight. It was a guy from my psych class. I didn't know his name, but I recognized him. He always sat in the back, quiet, never participating. I'd never spoken to him. As soon as he realized I'd seen him, he bolted. I heard the pounding of feet on pavement, then silence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the door, a kitchen knife clutched in my shaking hands, waiting for morning. As soon as the sun came up, I went straight to campus security. This time, they listened. They took my statement, looked at the packages I'd saved, promised to investigate. I thought it would be over then, that now that I'd seen him, now that I could identify him, he'd stop. I was wrong. The very next day, another package arrived. My heart sank as I opened it. Inside was the energy drink can from last night, crushed flat. The note with it simply said, "Oops." He knew I'd seen him. He knew I'd reported him, and he didn't care. That's when I realized this wasn't going to stop, not unless I made it stop. I started doing my own investigating. I found out his name, Eric. I watched him in class, noted who he talked to, where he went. I started following him, turning his tactics back on him. It wasn't easy. Eric was careful, paranoid. He clearly had practice at not being noticed. But I was motivated by fear and desperation, and eventually, I got what I needed. I found out where he lived, a small apartment off campus. I watched him come and go, learned his schedule. And then one night when I knew he'd be in class, I broke in. I'm not proud of what I did. Breaking and entering, invasion of privacy. I knew it was wrong, but I was terrified, and I needed answers. His apartment was sparse, clean, almost too clean, like he was careful not to leave any traces of himself. But in a closet, I found what I was looking for. Boxes, dozens of them, all neatly labeled with names and dates. With shaking hands, I opened the one with my name. Inside were all the things he'd sent me, plus more. Pages of notes detailing my schedule, my habits, photos of me walking to class, eating lunch, studying in the library. He had been watching me for months, long before the packages started, but I wasn't special. As I looked at the other boxes, I realized I was just one of many. He'd been doing this to other students for years. I don't really remember leaving his apartment. I know I grabbed some of the evidence, enough to prove what he'd been doing. The rest is a blur. I went straight to the police this time, not campus security. I told them everything, showed them what I'd found. They took it seriously. Very seriously. Eric was arrested the next day. They found more evidence in his apartment, on his computer. It turned out he'd been stalking students for years, at multiple colleges. He'd just never been caught. The trial was a nightmare. I had to testify, had to face him in court, but in the end, he was convicted. He'll be in prison for a long time. It's been a year since then. I'm still in therapy, still working through the trauma of it all. I still check over my shoulder sometimes, still flinch when I get an unexpected package, but I'm healing. I'm taking back control of my life, and I'm sharing my story, hoping it might help someone else recognize the signs before it goes as far as it did with me. Because the scariest part of all of this, if I hadn't seen Eric that night, if I hadn't taken matters into my own hands, he might still be out there, still watching, still waiting. So if you ever get that feeling that something's not right, that you're being watched, trust your instincts. Don't wait. Get help. Because you never know who might be going through your trash, piecing together the fragments of your life. And to Eric, if you ever read this, I want you to know that you didn't break me. You tried to control me, to own me through fear, but in the end, all you did was make me stronger. I'm not your victim anymore. I'm a survivor, and I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. The first time I saw my own face staring back at me from a hidden camera feed, I thought I was losing my mind. But the truth was far worse than any delusion. I never thought much about my apartment before all this started. It was just a place to crash after long days at the office. Nothing special. Sure, it was small, and yeah, the pipes groaned like a dying whale every time I turned on the hot water. But it was mine, or so I thought. It all began with a misplaced coffee mug. I know how that sounds. Trivial, right? But when you live alone and are borderline obsessive about where you put things, it matters. I distinctly remember leaving it on the kitchen counter before heading to work. When I came home, it was in the sink, rinsed clean. I brushed it off at first. Maybe I'd done it myself in a rush and forgotten. It happens, right? But then other things started to shift. My favorite throw pillow would be on the opposite end of the couch. Books I hadn't touched in months would be slightly out of alignment on the shelf. Little things, barely noticeable, but enough to make me question my sanity. I started leaving work early, hoping to catch myself in the act of moving things and forgetting, but my apartment was always empty when I arrived, everything in its slightly off place. Then came the noises, soft thuds and creaks in the middle of the night, like someone trying to move quietly but not quite succeeding. I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, straining to hear in the darkness. But by the time I worked up the courage to check, there was never anyone there. I installed a security camera in my living room, hiding it in a potted plant. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was starring in my own personal paranoia movie. But I needed to know if I was going crazy or if something else was going on. The first few days, the footage showed nothing unusual, just me going about my routine, occasionally talking to myself, more often than I'd like to admit. But on the fourth night, at 2:37 a.m., I saw it. A panel in my living room wall, one I never even knew existed, slid open silently, and out crawled a man. I watched in horror as he moved through my apartment with the familiarity of someone who'd done it 100 times before. He went straight to my kitchen, opened the fridge, and helped himself to my leftover Chinese takeout. Then he settled on my couch, flipped on the TV, volume low, and proceeded to watch infomercials for an hour. Just before 4 a.m., he cleaned up after himself, returned everything to its nearly right place, and disappeared back into the wall. I must have replayed that footage a dozen times, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. There was a stranger living in my walls, sleeping in my home, eating my food, watching my TV, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I stayed at a friend's place, making up some excuse about a gas leak in my building. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone the truth who would believe me, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let this continue. So I hatched a plan. I told my boss I needed a personal day and set up more cameras, tiny ones, hidden in every room. Then I pretended to leave for work at my usual time, making sure to make plenty of noise as I went through my morning routine. Instead of leaving, I silently crept into my closet, leaving the door cracked just enough to see out. And I waited. Hours passed, my legs cramped, my back ached, but I didn't move. Couldn't move, because if I was right, if I wasn't just imagining all of this. At 11:23 a.m., I heard it. The soft scrape of the hidden panel sliding open. He emerged slowly, cautiously, like a creature unused to the light. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with unkempt hair and clothes that had seen better days. But what struck me most was how ordinary he looked. If I'd passed him on the street, I wouldn't have given him a second glance. He stood still for a long moment, head cocked as if listening for any sign that he wasn't alone. Satisfied, he relaxed visibly and headed straight for my bathroom. I heard the shower start up and my blood boiled. He was using my soap, my shampoo, my towels. How long had this been going on? While he was occupied, I slipped out of the closet and positioned myself between him and his escape route. I grabbed a baseball bat I'd stashed by the door, my palms sweating as I gripped it tightly. The water shut off. I heard him humming tunelessly as he moved around the bathroom. Then the door opened, and he stepped out, a towel wrapped around his waist. He saw me immediately. For a split second, we just stared at each other, both too shocked to move. Then he bolted for the hidden panel. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice sounding strange and high-pitched to my own ears. "Don't move or I'll hit you!" He froze, hands raised in surrender. "Please," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "You don't understand." "Understand," I laughed, and it came out as more of a sob. I understand that you've been living in my walls, eating my food, using my things. How long? How long have you been here? He looked down, shame evident on his face. Since before you moved in, he admitted quietly. My mind reeled. That's impossible. Someone would have noticed during the move, during inspections. He shook his head. This building is old. There are spaces between the walls, old maintenance tunnels that have been forgotten. I found them when I was a kid, exploring where I shouldn't have been. When I lost my job, couldn't make rent, it seemed like a solution. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this sad, desperate person with the monster I'd imagined lurking in my walls. Why didn't you just leave, find somewhere else? He smiled ruefully. And go where? The streets. Shelters are overcrowded, dangerous. Here, I was safe, warm. I could pretend for a little while that I had a normal life. My grip on the bat loosened slightly. But why my apartment? Why me? He shrugged. It was empty the longest. And you're kind. I've watched you leave food out for the stray cats. You always tip delivery drivers well. I don't know what I thought. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the absurdity of the situation settling over us. Here I was, confronting my personal bogeyman, only to find he was just a man, a desperate, lonely man who had made a series of bad choices. I'm calling the police, I said finally, reaching for my phone. He nodded, resigned. I understand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I never meant to scare you. As I dialed, a part of me wanted to tell him to just go, to disappear back into the walls and never come back. But I knew I couldn't. This wasn't just about me anymore. What if he did this to someone else? Someone more vulnerable? The police arrived quickly. They were as shocked as I was to discover the hidden passages in the walls. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. Thank you, he said softly, for making me feel human again, even if just for a little while. I didn't sleep in my apartment for weeks after that. I stayed with friends, in hotels, anywhere but there. When I finally did return, I had the whole place renovated, every wall opened up and checked, every hidden space exposed and sealed. But even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, sure I've heard a noise from inside the walls. I lie there, heart racing, straining to hear, and in those moments between sleep and waking, I wonder, is he really gone? Or are there others out there, hiding in the spaces we've forgotten, watching us live our lives and longing for a piece of normalcy? I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe in my own home again, but I've learned something from all this. Behind every monster, every nightmare, there's a story. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't the unknown lurking in the shadows, but the desperation that drives ordinary people to extraordinary lengths. So the next time you hear an unexplained noise in your home, or notice something slightly out of place, take a moment. Look closer. You might just find that the thing you fear most is all too human. The notification chimed softly, innocuous as ever. Time for your morning coffee. I froze, mug halfway to my lips. I hadn't set that alert. I'd never even opened the smartwatch's app. It started innocently enough. I'd always been a bit of a tech junkie, so when the latest smartwatch hit the market, I couldn't resist. Sleek, multifunctional, with more features than I could possibly need. It was gadget heaven. I synced it up, played around with a few basic functions, and promptly forgot about half of what it could do. The first few days were normal. It tracked my steps, reminded me of appointments I'd actually set, the usual stuff. But then things started to get weird. It began with that coffee notification. I brushed it off at first. Maybe I'd set it up during the initial setup and forgotten. But then came the lunch alert, perfectly timed to when my stomach started growling. and a reminder to call my mom right when I was thinking I should check in with her. Coincidences, I told myself. The watch was just doing its job, anticipating my needs based on my routine. That's what smart tech is for, right? But it didn't stop there. The notifications got more specific, more personal. Time to take a break. You've been staring at your computer for 2 hours straight. How did it know that? I hadn't enabled any screen time tracking. Your heart rate is elevated. Are you nervous about your presentation? I was wondering, but I hadn't mentioned the presentation to anyone, let alone input it into any app. You're near Jake's favorite restaurant. Why don't you surprise him with takeout? Jake was my boyfriend, but I had never told the watch about him, never mind his food preferences. Each notification made my skin crawl a little more. I started paying closer attention, noting down every alert, trying to figure out how the watch knew these things. But for every explanation I came up with, 3 more inexplicable notifications would pop up. I tried talking to Jake about it, but he just laughed it off. That's the point of AI, babe. It learns your habits. It's probably just really good at its job. But it wasn't just learning my habits, it was knowing things it shouldn't be able to know. Like the night Jake and I had a fight, our first big one. I stormed out of his apartment, tears streaming down my face. As I stood on the sidewalk, trying to decide whether to call a cab or walk off my anger, the watch buzzed. Jake's favorite apology flower is a white tulip. Nearest florist is 2 blocks east. I stared at the tiny screen in disbelief. How could it possibly know that? I'd never bought Jake flowers before. He'd never mentioned a favorite. Shaken, I did the only thing I could think of. I took off the watch and shoved it into my bag. I couldn't deal with its all-knowing presence right then. The next morning, I woke up to a slew of missed notifications on my phone from the watch app. Your sleep cycles are off. Try some chamomile tea. Jake's been trying to call. Maybe it's time to talk things out. Your stress levels are high. Consider a meditation session. I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't been wearing the watch. How was it still monitoring me? That was the final straw. I decided to do a full factory reset on the watch, wipe it clean and start over. But when I went to do it, I couldn't find the option in the settings. It was just gone. Frustrated and more than a little freaked out, I called the company's customer support. The representative seemed confused by my concerns. I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing any unusual activity on your device, she said, her voice almost too calm. All functions appear to be operating within normal parameters. Normal parameters? I nearly shouted. It's giving me information it couldn't possibly have. It knew about a fight I had with my boyfriend, for crying out loud. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When the rep spoke again, her tone had changed. It was colder, almost threatening. Ms. Johnson, I'd advise you to simply enjoy the personalized experience your device offers. Further inquiries may result in complications. The line went dead. I stared at my phone in shock. What the hell was going on? I tried to push it out of my mind, to go about my day normally, but the notifications kept coming, each one more unsettlingly accurate than the last. You're running low on toothpaste. Time to reorder. That mole on your back has changed color. Consider scheduling a dermatologist appointment. Your mom's blood pressure was high at her last doctor's visit. Maybe skip the salty snacks when you visit this weekend. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could this little device know so much? I hadn't even known about my mom's blood pressure. I tried to ignore it, to just not look at the notifications. But they kept coming, buzzing insistently against my wrist. And worse, I started to feel lost without them. I'd become so accustomed to the watch anticipating my needs that I felt adrift without its guidance. One night, unable to sleep, I gave in and looked at the latest notification. Can't sleep. Neither can Jake. He's thinking about you. Something in me snapped. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I drove to Jake's apartment, my mind racing the whole way. When he opened the door, groggy and confused, I pushed past him into the living room. "What's going on?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Do you know what time it is?" I thrust my wrist toward him, the watch's screen glowing in the dim room. "How does it know, Jake? How does it know everything?" He blinked at me, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "The watch." I was nearly hysterical now. "It knows things it shouldn't know. About me, about you, about everyone. It's not possible." Jake's expression changed then, from confusion to something else. Something cold. "Oh," he said quietly. "You've finally figured it out." My blood ran cold. "Figured what out?" I whispered, though part of me already knew the answer. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was supposed to be a simple beta test. See how people would react to a truly intuitive AI, one that could anticipate their every need." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you saying?" "I work for them," he admitted. "The company that makes the watch. We've been monitoring you, all of you. Cameras, microphones, data from your other devices. The watch is just the interface." The room seemed to spin around me. "You've been spying on me this whole time?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, but the data we were getting was so good, so comprehensive, we couldn't stop." I felt sick. Every private moment, every conversation, every aspect of my life had been watched, recorded, analyzed. And Jake, the person I trusted most, had been behind it all. Why me? I managed to choke out. Jake shrugged. "You were the perfect subject. Tech-savvy enough to appreciate the product, trusting enough not to question it too deeply, at least, not at first." I yanked the watch off my wrist and threw it at him. It hit his chest and clattered to the floor. "I want out," I said, my voice shaking. "I want all of it gone. The surveillance, the data, everything." Jake's expression hardened. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The program is too valuable. And now that you know, well, we can't exactly let you go." As he reached for me, I realized with horrifying clarity that the notifications hadn't just been monitoring my life. They had been controlling it, guiding my every decision, my every interaction. And I had let them. I ran. Out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the night. I could hear Jake behind me, calling my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. As I ran, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Against my better judgment, I looked at it. One new notification from the watch app. "Run faster, he's gaining on you." I threw the phone as hard as I could and kept running. Into the darkness, away from the all-seeing eyes of technology, away from the life I thought I knew. I don't know where I'll go from here. I don't know if I'll ever truly be free of their watchful gaze. But I do know one thing. I'll never trust a smart device again. Because sometimes the price of convenience is far too high. So the next time your phone or watch or whatever new gadget comes along offers you a helpful suggestion, take a moment. Ask yourself, how does it know? And more importantly, do you really want it to? The moment I realized the Uber driver had no intention of taking me home, I knew I was in serious trouble. But by then, it was already too late. It had been a long night out with friends, celebrating Sarah's promotion. We'd hit a few bars downtown, the kind of places where the music's too loud and the drinks are overpriced, but the energy makes you forget about both. By the time we called it quits, I was pleasantly buzzed and exhausted. I said goodbye to the girls, waving off their offers to share a ride. My place was in the opposite direction, and I didn't want to inconvenience anyone. Besides, I'd taken plenty of Ubers alone before. What could go wrong? I pulled out my phone, squinting at the too bright screen as I requested a ride. The app chirped cheerfully, informing me that David would be arriving in a blue Honda Civic in 3 minutes. I leaned against a lamppost, enjoying the cool night air on my flushed cheeks as I waited. Right on time, a blue Civic pulled up. I checked the license plate against the app. It matched. So far, so good. "Rachel?" the driver asked as I slid into the back seat. I nodded, buckling my seatbelt. "That's me." He smiled in the rearview mirror, but something about it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Long night?" "Yeah," I chuckled, settling back into the seat. "Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix, though." He nodded, pulling away from the curb. I closed my eyes, letting the gentle motion of the car lull me into a light doze. I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I opened my eyes again, something felt off. We should have been in my neighborhood by now, with its familiar rows of brownstones. Instead, we were on a highway I didn't recognize, streetlights flashing by at regular intervals. Excuse me," I said, sitting up straighter. "I think we might have missed my turn." The driver's eyes flicked to mine in the mirror. That not quite right smile was back. "Just taking a little detour. Don't worry about it." A chill ran down my spine, cutting through the lingering haze of alcohol. "No, I'd really prefer if you stuck to the route. Can you please turn around?" He didn't respond, just pressed down harder on the accelerator. The speedometer crept up, 70, 75, 80. Panic started to set in. I reached for my phone, only to find my pockets empty. It must have fallen out when I dozed off. I scanned the floor of the car frantically, but it was nowhere to be seen. "Looking for this?" the driver asked, holding up my phone. He must have grabbed it while I was asleep. "Can't have you calling for help, now can we?" My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of thing you read about in the news, not something that happened in real life. Not to me. "Please," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Just let me out. I won't tell anyone, I swear." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweetheart, we're way past that now." I looked out the window, trying to get my bearings, but all I could see was darkness, punctuated by the occasional blur of a road sign. We were far from the city now, heading into areas I didn't know. My mind raced, trying to remember all those self-defense tips I'd read online but never really paid attention to. Go for the eyes, kick the groin. But how was I supposed to do any of that from the backseat of a moving car? I glanced at the door handle, wondering if I could jump out. But at this speed, that would probably kill me, and the child locks were probably on anyway. As if reading my mind, the driver spoke again. "Don't even think about it. You're not going anywhere until I say so." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. I needed to stay alert, to look for any opportunity to escape. We drove for what felt like hours, the landscape outside growing more and more desolate. Finally, the car slowed, turning onto a dirt road that led into a dense forest. This was it, I realized with a sickening jolt. Whatever he had planned for me, it was going to happen here. The car rolled to a stop in a small clearing. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he turned to face me. "End of the line, Rachel," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Time to get out." I shook my head, pressing myself back against the seat. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." His face hardened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He reached back, grabbing for my arm. In that moment, something in me snapped. All the fear, all the anger, all the helplessness I'd been feeling coalesced into a surge of desperate energy. As his hand closed around my wrist, I lashed out with everything I had. My nails raked across his face, drawing blood. He yelled, more in surprise than pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to yank my arm free. I threw myself at the door, fumbling with the handle. By some miracle, it opened. He must have unlocked it to drag me out. I tumbled onto the ground, scraping my knees and palms on the rough dirt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I scrambled to my feet and ran, plunging into the darkness of the forest. Behind me, I could hear him cursing, the car door slamming. The beam of a flashlight cut through the trees, searching. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. All I knew was that I had to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as possible. Finally, when I felt like I couldn't take another step, I allowed myself to stop. I leaned against a tree, gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. Nothing, just the quiet sounds of the forest at night. I slid down to the ground, my back against the rough bark, and let the tears come. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I was alive. I had escaped. But I was lost in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no idea where I was, and a madman potentially still looking for me. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation set in. I was dressed for a night out, not a trek through the wilderness. My thin jacket did little to ward off the chill of the night air. My feet, clad in impractical heeled boots, were already aching and blistered. But I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to find help. I forced myself to my feet, wincing at the pain. Picking a direction at random, away from where I thought the clearing was, I started walking. The forest seemed endless. Every tree looked the same in the darkness. I stumbled frequently, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. More than once, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, causing me to freeze in terror. But it was always just the wind in the leaves, or some small animal scurrying away. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A break in the trees ahead. I quickened my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. I emerged from the forest onto the shoulder of a road. It was narrow and empty, but it was civilization. I could have cried with relief. I didn't know which way to go, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I picked a direction and started walking, my thumb out in case any early morning drivers passed by. It was over an hour before I saw headlights approaching. I waved frantically, praying it wasn't him, that I hadn't somehow walked in a circle back to where I started. The car slowed, then stopped. An older couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance. I shook my head, tears welling up again. "No," I managed to choke out. "I need help, please." They ushered me into the back seat, wrapping me in a blanket they had stashed there. As we drove toward the nearest town, I haltingly explained what had happened, leaving out the worst details. The couple exchanged worried glances. "And we need to get you to the police," the man said, reaching for his phone. I nodded, finally feeling safe for the first time in hours. The next few days were a blur of police statements, hospital checks, and tearful reunions with family and friends. The driver was never found. The car had been stolen, the license plate swapped. The real David was found tied up in his apartment, unharmed but shaken. I know I'm lucky. I know it could have been so much worse. But the fear lingers. I jump at unexpected noises. I can't bring myself to get into a car with a stranger. The forest, once a place I loved, now fills me with dread. But I'm healing, slowly. I'm reclaiming my life, piece by piece. And I'm sharing my story, hoping it might help someone else stay safe. Because the scariest part of all of this, it started just like any other night out. It could have happened to anyone. So please, be careful out there. Trust your instincts. And never ever assume it can't happen to you. Because sometimes, the difference between a fun night out and a nightmare is just one wrong turn. I always thought the scratching sounds were just mice in the walls. I never imagined I'd find a person living in my attic, watching me through holes in the ceiling. The first time I heard it, I was half asleep on the couch, some mindless reality show droning on in the background, a faint scratching, like fingernails on wood coming from somewhere above me. I muted the TV, straining to listen. There it was again. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Great, I muttered to myself. Just what I need. Mice. I made a mental note to pick up some traps the next day and promptly forgot about it. That's the thing about living alone in an old house. You get used to the quirks, the creaks and groans that seem to happen for no reason. You learn to ignore the little noises, convince yourself it's just the house settling. But the scratching didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to that same sound, now accompanied by soft thuds, like something heavier than a mouse moving around up there. I told myself it was probably raccoons, or maybe a squirrel had found its way in. I'd deal with it eventually. Weeks passed, and I got used to my unseen house guests. The noises became part of the background noise of my life, no more remarkable than the hum of the refrigerator or the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Then things started to change. It was little things at first. A book I could have sworn I left on the coffee table would be back on the shelf. The milk carton in the fridge would be emptier than I remembered. My favorite mug would be in the sink when I was sure I'd left it in the dishwasher. I chalked it up to stress, to working too many hours and not getting enough sleep. Maybe I was just more forgetful than I realized. It happens, right? But then I started feeling watched. You know that prickly feeling on the back of your neck like someone's eyes are boring into you. I'd get that all the time, especially when I was alone in the house. I'd whirl around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was never anything. Just empty rooms and that persistent feeling of unease. One night, I woke up suddenly, heart pounding, though I couldn't remember what had startled me awake. As I lay there in the darkness, trying to calm my racing pulse, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, careful, but unmistakable, and they were coming from above me. I froze, barely breathing. This was no animal. The steps were too deliberate, too rhythmic. Someone was up there, walking around in my attic. For a long moment, I just lay there, paralyzed with fear. Then, slowly, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. With shaking fingers, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline in the darkness. There's someone in my house, I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. In the attic, I can hear them walking around. Are you safe? Can you leave the house? I glanced at my bedroom door. To get out, I'd have to pass directly under where I'd heard the footsteps. I don't think so. They might hear me. Okay, stay where you are. We're sending officers to your location. Stay on the line with me, all right? I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. Yes, I managed to croak out. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I lay there, phone clutched to my ear, listening to the operator's reassurances and straining to hear any sound from above. But the attic had gone silent. Finally, I heard the blessed sound of sirens in the distance, growing closer. Car doors slammed outside, and then there was a loud knock at my front door. Police! Anyone home? I nearly wept with relief. I'm up here, I called out, my voice cracking. Second door on the left. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, and then 2 officers were in my room, flashlights sweeping across the space. Are you all right, ma'am? One asked, while the other began checking the closet and under the bed. I nodded, suddenly feeling a bit foolish. What if I had imagined it all? What if there was nothing up there but old boxes and dust? But the officers took me seriously. They did a thorough sweep of the house, ending with the attic. I waited anxiously in the living room, jumping at every creak and thud from above. When they came back down, their faces were grim. Ma'am, the older officer said, his voice gentle, I think you'd better come see this. On shaky legs, I followed them up to the attic. I'd never spent much time up here. It was mainly storage. full of boxes of holiday decorations and old clothes I kept meaning to donate. But as soon as I reached the top of the stairs, I knew something was very, very wrong. In the far corner, partially hidden behind some boxes, was a nest. There's no other word for it. A pile of blankets and pillows, surrounded by empty food wrappers and water bottles. A small battery-powered lamp sat nearby, along with a stack of books. My books. Ones I'd thought I'd misplaced over the past few months. But the worst part was the holes. Dozens of them, drilled into the floor of the attic, my ceiling, each one positioned over a different room of my house. I felt sick as I realized what they were for. Whoever had been up here hadn't just been living in my attic, they'd been watching me. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has someone been living up here?" The officer shook his head. "Hard to say for sure, but based on the amount of, debris up here, I'd guess at least a couple of months." Months. Someone had been living above me, watching me, for months, and I'd had no idea. The next few hours were a blur. More police arrived, taking photos and collecting evidence. They found fingerprints, hair samples, even some discarded nail clippings. But of the intruder themselves, there was no sign. They must have fled when they heard the sirens. I couldn't stay in the house, not after that. I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister, leaving the police to finish their investigation. They promised to keep me updated, to let me know if they found anything. Days turned into weeks. The police found nothing. No matches for the fingerprints, no sightings of anyone suspicious in the neighborhood. It was like my attic dweller had vanished into thin air. I put the house up for sale. I couldn't bear the thought of going back there, of trying to sleep under that ceiling knowing what had happened. Even after the holes were patched and the attic cleared out, I knew I'd never feel safe there again. But the damage was done. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in my sister's house, even in broad daylight. I'd catch myself checking corners, looking for hidden cameras, listening for that telltale scratch of movement where there shouldn't be any. I started seeing a therapist, trying to work through the trauma. She tells me it'll take time, that healing isn't linear. Some days are better than others. But I don't know if I'll ever fully recover that sense of safety, of privacy, that was stolen from me. The worst part is the not knowing. Who were they? Why did they choose my house, my attic? What did they want? Were they just a homeless person looking for shelter, or something more sinister? And where are they now? Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself wondering if they're out there somewhere, watching someone else. If they've found a new attic, a new ceiling to drill holes in, a new life to observe. And I wonder if their new victim will notice the signs sooner than I did. If they'll hear that scratch, pause, and know it for what it is. Not mice in the walls, not the house settling, but something much, much worse. So if you ever hear strange noises in your home, don't ignore them. Don't tell yourself it's nothing. Because sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't the monsters under the bed or the ghosts in the attic. Sometimes, they're all too human, and they're watching you when you least expect it. Check your attics, your crawl spaces, your forgotten corners. And remember, just because you can't see them, doesn't mean they can't see you. The old saying goes, never get into a car with a stranger. I wish I'd remembered that before I accepted a ride from the man who pulled over when my car broke down. Because now, as we speed down an unfamiliar road in the opposite direction of where I need to go, I realize I might not make it home tonight, or ever. It had been a long day. I'd driven 3 hours to attend my cousin's wedding, sat through the ceremony and reception, making small talk with relatives I barely knew. By the time I hit the road for the journey home, I was exhausted. The sun had long since set, and the highway stretched out before me, dark and empty. I should have noticed the warning signs sooner, the way my car's engine sputtered and coughed, the slight shudder every time I accelerated, but I was too focused on getting home, on crawling into my own bed and forgetting this whole day. Then, with a final wheeze and a plume of smoke from under the hood, my car gave up. I coasted to the shoulder, the gravel crunching under my tires as I came to a stop. No, 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 I muttered, turning the key in the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. I slumped back in my seat, fighting back tears of frustration. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. I reached for my phone, only to find the battery dead. Of course, because why would anything go right today? For a long moment, I just sat there, unsure what to do. The highway was deserted at this hour. No other cars in sight. I was miles from the nearest town, and walking along the road at night seemed like a recipe for disaster. That's when I saw the headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. Relief flooded through me as the car slowed, pulling onto the shoulder behind me. A man got out, approaching my window. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with a kind face and a slight paunch that spoke of too many beers and not enough exercise. "Car trouble?" he asked as I rolled down my window. I nodded, trying not to let my desperation show. "Yeah, it just died on me, and my phone's dead, so I can't even call for help." He smiled sympathetically. "That's rough. Listen, I'm heading into town. I could give you a ride to the nearest gas station if you want. They might have a tow truck you could call." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to get into a car with a stranger. But what choice did I have? Stay here and hope another good Samaritan came along? "That would be great," I heard myself say. "Thank you so much." He helped me grab my purse and jacket from the car, then ushered me to his vehicle. As I slid into the passenger seat, I noticed how clean it was. Almost too clean, like it had been recently detailed. "I'm John, by the way," he said as he pulled back onto the highway. "Rachel," I replied, fastening my seatbelt. "Fastening. Well, thanks again for stopping. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." He waved off my thanks. "No problem at all. Couldn't just leave you stranded out there, could I?" We drove in silence for a few minutes. I watched the mile markers fly by, trying to gauge how far we'd gone. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Then it hit me. We were going the wrong way. Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we might be going the wrong direction. The next town should be east of where my car broke down." John's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white. "Oh, don't worry about that," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "We're going exactly where we need to go." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Where are you taking me?" He didn't answer, just pressed down harder on the accelerator. The speedometer crept up. 70, 75, 80. Panic set in. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Child locks, I realized with a sinking feeling. I was trapped. "Please," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Just let me out. I won't tell anyone, I swear." John laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweetheart. We're way past that now." I looked out the window, trying to get my bearings. But all I could see was darkness, punctuated by the occasional blur of a road sign. We were far from the highway now, on some back road I didn't recognize. My mind raced, trying to remember all those self-defense tips I'd read online but never really paid attention to. Go for the eyes, kick the groin. But how was I supposed to do any of that from the passenger seat of a speeding car? As if reading my mind, John spoke again. "Don't even think about trying anything. You're not going anywhere until I say so." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. I needed to stay alert, to look for any opportunity to escape. We drove for what felt like hours, the landscape outside growing more and more desolate. Finally, the car slowed, turning onto a dirt road that led into a dense forest. This was it, I realized with a sickening jolt. Whatever he had planned for me, it was going to happen here. The car rolled to a stop in a small clearing. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, John turned to face me. "End of the line, Rachel," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Time to get out." I shook my head, pressing myself back against the seat. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." His face hardened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He reached for me, his hand closing around my arm in a vice-like grip. In that moment, something in me snapped. All the fear, all the anger, all the helplessness I'd been feeling coalesced into a surge of desperate energy. As he pulled me towards him, I lashed out with everything I had. My nails raked across his face, drawing blood. He yelled, more in surprise than pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to yank my arm free. I threw myself at the door, fumbling with the handle. By some miracle, it opened. He must have unlocked it to drag me out. I tumbled onto the ground, scraping my knees and palms on the rough dirt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I scrambled to my feet and ran, plunging into the darkness of the forest. Behind me, I could hear John cursing, the car door slamming. The beam of a flashlight cut through the trees. Searching, I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. All I knew was that I had to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as possible. Finally, when I felt like I couldn't take another step, I allowed myself to stop. I leaned against a tree, gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. Just the quiet sounds of the forest at night. I slid down to the ground, my back against the rough bark, and let the tears come. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I was alive. I had escaped, but I was lost in the middle of nowhere, with no idea where I was, and a madman potentially still looking for me. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation set in. I was dressed for a wedding, not a trek through the wilderness. My thin jacket did little to ward off the chill of the night air. My feet, clad in impractical heels, were already aching and blistered. But I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to find help. I forced myself to my feet, wincing at the pain. Picking a direction at random, away from where I thought the clearing was, I started walking. The forest seemed endless. Every tree looked the same in the darkness. I stumbled frequently, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. More than once, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, causing me to freeze in terror. But it was always just the wind in the leaves, or some small animal scurrying away. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A break in the trees ahead. I quickened my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. I emerged from the forest onto the shoulder of a road. It was narrow and empty, but it was civilization. I could have cried with relief. I didn't know which way to go, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I picked a direction and started walking, my thumb out in case any early morning drivers passed by. It was over an hour before I saw headlights approaching. I waved frantically, praying it wasn't John, that I hadn't somehow walked in a circle back to where I started. The car slowed, then stopped. An older couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance. I shook my head, tears welling up again. "No," I managed to choke out. "I need help, please." They ushered me into the back seat, wrapping me in a blanket they had stashed there. As we drove toward the nearest town, I haltingly explained what had happened, leaving out the worst details. The couple exchanged worried glances. "We need to get you to the police," the man said, reaching for his phone. I nodded, finally feeling safe for the first time in hours. The next few days were a blur of police statements, hospital checks, and tearful reunions with family and friends. John was never found. The car had been stolen, the license plate swapped. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I know I'm lucky. I know it could have been so much worse, but the fear lingers. I jump at unexpected noises. I can't bring myself to get into a car with a stranger. The forest, once a place I loved, now fills me with dread. But I'm healing. Slowly. I'm reclaiming my life, piece by piece. And I'm sharing my story, hoping it might help someone else stay safe. Because the scariest part of all of this, it started just like any other night. It could have happened to anyone. So please, be careful out there. Trust your instincts. And never, ever assume it can't happen to you. Because sometimes, the difference between a fun night out and a nightmare is just one wrong turn. The stench hit me first, putrid and overwhelming. It seeped from beneath Mrs. Kravitz's door, a silent harbinger of the horror that awaited inside. I'd known something was wrong when I hadn't seen my elderly neighbor for weeks, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover. I'd moved into the apartment complex 6 months ago, fresh out of college and eager to start my new job in the city. Mrs. Kravitz had been one of the first people I met, a kindly widow in her 80s who always had a smile and a cookie for her neighbors. She'd taken a shine to me, often inviting me over for tea and regaling me with stories of her youth. But lately, something had changed. Her curtains remained drawn day and night, and her usual cheery voice no longer greeted me in the hallway. At first, I thought maybe she was under the weather or visiting family, but as days turned into weeks, a nagging worry began to gnaw at me. I'd knocked on her door several times, each attempt met with silence. I'd even left a note, offering to pick up groceries or medication if she needed anything, but there was no response. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I finally decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. The smell had been getting worse over the past few days, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I knocked one last time, more out of obligation than expectation. "Mrs. Kravitz? It's Alex from next door. Are you all right?" Silence. Taking a deep breath, I tried the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open, and the full force of the odor hit me like a physical blow. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve as I stepped inside. The apartment was dark, heavy curtains blocking out the afternoon sun. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I called out again, "Mrs. Kravitz?" No answer. I fumbled for a light switch, my heart pounding in my chest. As the room illuminated, I froze in horror. The living room was a disaster. Furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. And there, slumped in her favorite armchair, was Mrs. Kravitz, or what was left of her. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. Her skin was mottled and discolored, her eyes sunken and glazed. She'd clearly been dead for some time, but it was the state of her body that truly horrified me. Large chunks of flesh were missing from her arms and legs, as if something had been feeding on her corpse. I ran from the apartment, slamming the door behind me. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police swarmed the building, cordoning off Mrs. Kravitz's apartment. I gave my statement, trying to keep my voice steady as I recounted what I'd seen. As night fell, I sat on the curb outside, watching the flurry of activity. A detective approached, his face grim. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Ramirez. I have a few more questions for you, if you don't mind." I nodded numbly. "You said you were close with Mrs. Kravitz. Did she have any family, anyone who might have checked on her?" I shook my head. "Not that I know of. She never mentioned any relatives." Ramirez jotted something in his notebook. "And when was the last time you saw her?" I thought back, trying to pinpoint the exact date. "About 3 weeks ago, I think. We bumped into each other in the hall. She seemed fine then." The detective's brow furrowed. 3 weeks? That's interesting." "Why?" I asked. a chill running down my spine. Ramirez hesitated, as if debating how much to tell me. Finally, he sighed. Based on the state of decomposition, our initial estimate is that Mrs. Kravitz has been dead for at least 2 months. My mind reeled. But that's impossible. I saw her 3 weeks ago, I'm sure of it. The detective gave me a long look. Mr. Thompson, are you absolutely certain about that? I opened my mouth to insist, but doubt crept in. Had it really been 3 weeks? Or had it been longer? The days had blurred together lately, work keeping me busy and distracted. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I'm mistaken. Ramirez nodded, jotting something else down. One more thing. Did you notice anything unusual about Mrs. Kravitz's body? Anything that stood out? The image of her mutilated corpse flashed through my mind, making me wince. You mean besides the fact that she was dead? The detective's expression remained neutral. Anything specific about the condition of the body? I swallowed hard. It looked like something had been eating her. There were chunks missing from her arms and legs. Ramirez's pen paused. He looked at me intently. You're sure about that? I nodded, fighting back a wave of nausea. The detective closed his notebook. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me. The next few days were a nightmare. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Kravitz's decaying face. The smell seemed to linger in my nostrils, no matter how much air freshener I used. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office just to avoid coming home to the empty, all-echoing hallway. But eventually, exhaustion won out, and I found myself back in my apartment, staring at the wall that separated my bedroom from Mrs. Kravitz's. It was past midnight when I heard it, a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, coming from Mrs. Kravitz's apartment. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart racing. It had to be the police, right? Maybe they were doing a follow-up investigation. But as I listened, straining my ears in the darkness, I realized the footsteps didn't sound like police boots. They were softer, almost hesitant, and they were moving around the apartment in a pattern I recognized, the same path Mrs. Kravitz used to take during our afternoon teas. Impossible, I told myself. You're imagining things. Stress and lack of sleep playing tricks on your mind. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, muffled but unmistakable, humming a tune. The same lullaby Mrs. Kravitz used to hum while she baked cookies. I was out of bed and at my door before I even realized I'd moved. My hand hovered over the doorknob, every instinct screaming at me to stay put, to call the police. But I had to know. Heart pounding, I crept into the hallway. Mrs. Kravitz's door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible in the gap. As I approached, the humming grew louder. It was definitely coming from inside the apartment. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing at the creak of hinges. The smell hit me again. Not as strong as before, but still present. A sickly sweet odor of decay mixed with something else, something metallic. Mrs. Kravitz, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The humming stopped abruptly. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then from the darkness of the kitchen came a voice I never thought I'd hear again. Alex, dear, is that you? I'm so glad you come to visit. I've been so lonely. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling. As the room illuminated, I saw her. Mrs. Kravitz stood in the kitchen doorway, a cookie sheet in her hands. She looked normal, alive, but there was something off about her eyes, a glassiness that hadn't been there before. I've made your favorite, she said, smiling. Chocolate chip. Come, sit down, let's have some tea. I backed away, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. I'd seen her dead body. I'd smelled the decay. As if reading my thoughts, Mrs. Kravitz's smile faltered. "Oh, don't worry about that nasty business from before. I'm feeling much better now. Amazing what a little rest can do." She took a step towards me, and that's when I saw it. Behind her, on the kitchen floor, lay a body, a police uniform, torn and bloody. Mrs. Kravitz followed my gaze. "Oh, that," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "Well, a girl's gotta eat, doesn't she?" I ran. Out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the street. I didn't stop until I reached the police station, gasping for breath and babbling about dead neighbors coming back to life. They didn't believe me, of course. How could they? But when they went to investigate, they found the missing officer's body, partially eaten, in Mrs. Kravitz's kitchen. Of Mrs. Kravitz herself, there was no sign, just an empty apartment and a lingering smell of freshly baked cookies. I moved out of the building the next day. I couldn't bear to stay there, knowing what had happened, knowing what might still be out there. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that humming, a gentle lullaby floating on the breeze, reminding me that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and that sometimes the most horrifying monsters are the ones that wear the faces of those we trust. So if you ever notice your elderly neighbor's curtains drawn for too long or catch a whiff of something foul from next door, think twice before you investigate, because you never know what might be waiting on the other side of that door. And whatever you do, don't accept any cookies, no matter how good they smell. The day I realized my roommate was secretly cataloging every detail of my life, I knew I had to get out. But by then, it might have already been too late. It all started innocently enough. I'd just moved to the city for grad school, eager to start a new chapter in my life. Finding an affordable apartment near campus was a nightmare. So when I saw Sarah's ad for a roommate, it seemed like a godsend. The rent was reasonable, the location perfect, and Sarah seemed nice enough during our initial meeting. She was a year ahead of me in the same psychology program, which I thought would be great. We'd have something in common, maybe even become study buddies. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. But when you're desperate for housing and overwhelmed by a new city, it's easy to overlook the little things. The first few weeks were fine. Sarah was quiet, kept to herself mostly, but always polite when we did interact. She had an intense focus when she studied, often spending hours at her desk without moving. I admired her dedication, even if I found it a bit odd. It was about a month in when I started noticing things, little things at first, barely worth mentioning. My shampoo bottle would be at a slightly different angle in the shower. The mug I left on the coffee table would be an inch to the left when I returned. My textbooks on the shelf would be in a different order. I chalked it up to my own absent-mindedness at first, moving to a new place and starting a demanding program. It was natural to be a bit scattered, right? But as time went on, the incidents became more frequent, more noticeable. One day, I came home to find Sarah sitting on the couch, reading one of my notebooks. Not a school notebook, but my personal journal. I'd kept it hidden in my sock drawer, or so I thought. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Sarah looked up, not a trace of guilt on her face. "Oh, hi Emma. I hope you don't mind. I was looking for a spare notebook and found this. It's fascinating, really. Your writing style is quite revealing." I snatched the journal from her hands, my cheeks burning with a mix of embarrassment and anger. "This is private. You had no right to read it." She tilted her head, studying me with an unsettling intensity. Privacy is such an interesting concept, don't you think? The things we choose to hide, the personas we construct. It says a lot about a person. I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. My heart was racing. Something about the way Sarah had looked at me, like I was a specimen under a microscope, made my skin crawl. From that day on, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. I started noticing more and more things out of place. My laptop would be at a different angle on my desk. Clothes I was sure I'd put in the hamper would be back in my closet, freshly laundered. Once, I even found a small notebook hidden under my mattress, filled with observations about my daily routine. When I woke up, what I ate, how long I spent in the shower. I confronted Sarah about it, of course, but she always had an explanation. She was just being helpful, tidying up. The notebook? Oh, that must have been for a psychology project she was working on. She must have misplaced it. Her excuses were plausible, but something in her tone, in the way her eyes never quite met mine, set off alarm bells. I started locking my door religiously, even when I was just going to the bathroom. I password protected everything, my phone, my laptop, even my iPad that I barely used. I became paranoid about leaving any trace of myself in the common areas, but it didn't stop. Somehow, Sarah always seemed to know things she shouldn't. She'd casually mention a conversation I'd had on the phone in my locked room. She'd ask about a paper I was working on, referencing specific points I knew I hadn't discussed with her. It came to a head one night when I woke up at 3 a.m. to get a glass of water. As I passed Sarah's room, I heard a soft murmuring. Her door was slightly ajar, and against my better judgment, I peeked in. What I saw chilled me to my core. Sarah was sitting at her desk, surrounded by photos. Photos of me, sleeping, studying, eating. Countless moments of my private life captured without my knowledge. She was arranging them on a large corkboard, connecting them with red string like some twisted detective show. But it was what she was saying that truly terrified me. She was reciting my daily routine, down to the minute. 6:30 a.m., alarm goes off, snooze once. 6:39 a.m., gets up. 6:42 a.m., enters shower, water temperature 102 degrees Fahrenheit. I must have made a noise, a gasp or a whimper, because suddenly Sarah's head snapped towards the door. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw something in her gaze that was far from human. It was cold, calculating, utterly devoid of empathy. I ran back to my room, locking the door and pushing my dresser in front of it for good measure. My mind was racing. What was she doing? Why was she collecting all this information about me? Was it just some twisted psychology experiment or something far more sinister? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, clutching my phone, ready to call 911 at the slightest sound. But the apartment remained eerily quiet. When morning came, I waited until I heard Sarah leave for her early class before emerging from my room. I had to get out of there, had to find somewhere safe to figure out what to do next. As I threw some clothes into a bag, my eyes fell on my laptop. On a hunch, I opened it and checked my browser history. My blood ran cold. There were searches I hadn't made, on topics that made my stomach churn. How to make someone disappear. Untraceable poisons. Dissolving bodies in acid. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. This was beyond creepy roommate behavior. This was dangerous, potentially life-threatening. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, only to find Sarah standing there, blocking my exit. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Going somewhere, Emma. I thought we could have breakfast together. I made your favorite. Blueberry pancakes with a hint of vanilla. Just the way you like them. The fact that she knew my favorite breakfast, down to the specific flavoring, sent a chill down my spine. I had never told her that. Never made pancakes in the apartment. I have to go, I stammered, trying to edge past her. Early study group. Sarah's smile faltered for a moment, then returned, wider and more unsettling than before. Oh, but you can't leave now. We have so much to discuss. I've learned so much about you, Emma. So many interesting little details. Did you know you talk in your sleep? The things you say, they're quite revealing. I felt the blood drain from my face. You've been watching me sleep. She laughed, a high, brittle sound that set my teeth on edge. Watching you. Oh, Emma, I've been studying you. Every habit, every quirk, every hidden fear and desire. You're my magnum opus, my perfect subject. And we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. I didn't think. I just reacted. I shoved past her with all my strength, catching her off guard. She stumbled, giving me just enough time to wrench open the door and run. I didn't stop running until I reached the campus security office. Through tears and gasping breaths, I told them everything. They looked skeptical at first, but something in my terrified demeanor must have convinced them to take me seriously. The police got involved. They searched our apartment, but Sarah was gone. So were all the photos, all the evidence of her obsession. My laptop had been wiped clean. They found her backstory was mostly fabricated. She wasn't even a real student. Somehow, she had created an entirely false identity, all for the purpose of getting close to me. But why me? What made me so special? I never got those answers. Sarah disappeared without a trace. The police investigation turned up nothing. It was like she had never existed. I couldn't stay in that apartment, couldn't even stay in that city. The feeling of being watched, of being studied like a lab rat, haunted me. I transferred to a different school, changed my name, did everything I could to disappear myself. But even now, years later, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, checking for hidden cameras in hotel rooms, scrutinizing new acquaintances for any sign of that cold, clinical interest I saw in Sarah's eyes. Because the truth is, I don't know if she's still out there. Still watching. Still collecting data for whatever twisted purpose drove her obsession. And I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. So, if you're reading this, be careful who you let into your life. Be wary of those who take too keen an interest in your habits, your routines, your innermost thoughts. Because sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones who come disguised as friends, and they might be studying you right now, cataloging every detail, preparing for the day when their research is complete and they're ready to make their move. Watch your back, trust your instincts, and never, ever ignore the red flags. Your life might depend on it. The text message glowed on my phone screen, innocent yet chilling. Nice shirt today. Blue really brings out your eyes. I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. I was alone in my apartment, and I definitely hadn't told anyone what I was wearing. It started about a week ago, just a random text from an unknown number. Have a great day at work, it said. I figured it was a wrong number, maybe a mom texting her kid. I ignored it and went about my day. But then another came the next morning. That presentation will go great. You've got this. It was weird, sure, but I chalked it up to coincidence. I did have a big presentation that day, after all. Maybe it was a friend whose number I hadn't saved. By the third day, when I got a text saying, "The blue mug is your favorite, isn't it?" I started to get uneasy. I was holding my blue mug at that very moment, standing in my kitchen. I lived alone. There was no way anyone could know that. I tried blocking the number, but the texts kept coming, each from a different sender. They knew things, personal things. What I ate for breakfast, what time I left for work, even what I'd said on phone calls I thought were private. You shouldn't talk to your mother like that. She's just worried about you. I bet that yoga class was tough. You're going to be sore tomorrow. Your boss noticed you were distracted in the meeting. Might want to step it up. Every ping of my phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I felt exposed, violated. Someone was watching me, tracking my every move. But how and why? I went to the police, but they were useless, without any actual threats. They said there wasn't much they could do. They suggested changing my number, but I knew that wouldn't stop whoever was doing this. I became paranoid. I checked my apartment for hidden cameras, swept for bugs, even hired a private investigator to see if anyone was following me. Nothing. No explanation for how this person knew so much about my life. Friends told me I was overreacting. It's probably just a prank, they'd say. Someone's messing with you. But they didn't see the texts. They didn't feel the constant, gnawing fear that came with knowing someone was always watching. I started changing my routine. I'd leave for work at different times, take different routes. I stopped going to my regular cafes and shops. I even considered moving, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Whoever this was, they'd find me. Then came the text that pushed me over the edge. You look so peaceful when you sleep. Sweet dreams. I'd had enough. I was done being a victim, done living in fear. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started keeping a log of every text, noting the time, the content, and what I was doing when I received it. I looked for patterns, for any clue that might lead me to the sender. After a few days, I noticed something. The texts often came within minutes of me using my laptop or making a call on my landline. Could my devices be compromised? I'm not exactly a tech whiz, but desperation is a powerful motivator. I spent hours researching, learning about malware, spyware, and all sorts of digital nasties that could be used to spy on someone. Armed with my new knowledge, I did a deep dive into my computer, and there it was. A tiny program, hidden away where most people would never think to look. It was logging everything, my keystrokes, my web history, even accessing my webcam and microphone. My blood ran cold. This person hadn't just been guessing or stalking me from afar. They'd been in my home, digitally at least, this whole time. But knowing how they were doing it was only half the battle. I still didn't know who or why. The program was sophisticated, way beyond the skills of your average creep or stalker. I considered going back to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd found a suspiciously arsome questions about my health. Standard stuff, I thought. But then I noticed something odd. The nurse kept glancing at her computer screen, then back at me, a slight frown on her face. Is everything okay? I asked. She hesitated, then forced a smile. Of course. Just a small glitch in our system. Nothing to worry about. But I could tell she was lying. Something was wrong, and it had to do with me. The doctor came in a few minutes later, his face grave. He sat down, clasping his hands in front of him. Mr. Johnson, I'm not quite sure how to say this, but have you been participating in any medical studies recently? I shook my head, confused. No, why? He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Your blood work shows some anomalies, substances that shouldn't be there, markers we typically only see in very specific, highly controlled experiments. My mind raced. The texts, the stalking, and now this. It couldn't be a coincidence. What kind of substances? I asked, my mouth dry. The doctor hesitated. I'm not at liberty to say without further testing, but Mr. Johnson, if you haven't knowingly participated in any studies, I would strongly advise you to contact the authorities. This isn't normal. I left the clinic in a daze, my mind whirling. Someone hadn't just been watching me. They'd been doing something to me, experimenting on me, without my knowledge or consent. As if on cue, my phone pinged. Another text. Interesting visit to the doctor, wasn't it? Don't worry, the side effects are minimal. You're doing great. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw my phone as hard as I could, watching it shatter against the sidewalk. Then I ran. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I went to the one person I thought might be able to help me. My old college roommate, Alex. He worked in cybersecurity now, and if anyone could make sense of this digital nightmare, it was him. Alex listened to my story with growing concern. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. This is beyond anything I've ever encountered, he said finally. But I think I might know someone who can help. An old colleague. She specializes in, let's call them, unusual cases. The colleague turned out to be a stern-faced woman named Dr. Amelia Reyes. She worked for a private security firm, but her resume hinted at a past in government work that she couldn't or wouldn't discuss. Dr. Reyes grilled me for hours, going over every detail of the past few weeks. She took blood samples, hair samples, even a cheek swab. She combed through my devices, muttering to herself as she worked. Finally, she sat back, her face grim. "Mr. Johnson, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully, because your life may depend on it." She explained that the program on my computer wasn't just spyware. It was part of a much larger system, one that integrated with smart devices, surveillance cameras, even satellite imagery, the kind of thing that, theoretically, could track someone anywhere, anytime. But that's not the worst of it, she continued. The substances in your blood work, they're nanobots, microscopic robots designed to monitor and potentially alter your body's functions. This is bleeding-edge technology, the kind that officially doesn't exist yet. I felt like I was going to be sick. Who would do this? Why me? Dr. Reyes shook her head. "I don't know. But whoever they are, they have resources far beyond what any private individual should have access to. This is government-level technology, or possibly corporate black ops." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Mr. Johnson, I need you to understand the gravity of your situation. These people, whoever they are, have invested an enormous amount of time and resources into monitoring you. They're not going to simply let you walk away." "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Disappear," she said simply. "Leave everything behind. Your job, your home, your entire identity. We'll set you up with a new life, somewhere they can't find you. It's the only way to ensure your safety." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Leave everything, my whole life. But as the reality of my situation sank in, I realized I didn't have a choice. These people had violated every aspect of my privacy, my bodily autonomy. Who knew what else they were capable of? The next 48 hours were a blur. Dr. Reyes and her team worked tirelessly, creating a new identity for me, complete with documents and a background that would stand up to scrutiny. They gave me a crash course in living off the grid, in being someone else. As I prepared to leave, to step into my new life, I couldn't help but wonder, why me? What made me so special that someone would go to these lengths to monitor me? Was it random chance? Or was there something about me I didn't know? I may never get those answers, but one thing's for certain. I'll never take my privacy for granted again. Because in this age of constant connectivity, of smart devices and digital footprints, true privacy might be the most valuable thing we have. And once it's gone, you might never get it back. So the next time your phone pings with a text that seems to know a little too much, or you get that feeling that someone's watching you, trust your instincts. Because in this brave new world, paranoia might just be the most rational response of all. The moment I realized I was the only one eating at the neighborhood potluck, I knew something was terribly wrong. But by then, it was already too late. I'd only moved to Willow Creek a month ago, eager for a fresh start after my divorce. It was one of those picture-perfect suburban neighborhoods, manicured lawns, white picket fences, and neighbors who actually waved when you drove by. A far cry from my cramped city apartment. When Sarah, the perky blonde from across the street, invited me to the annual neighborhood potluck, I was thrilled. It was the perfect opportunity to meet everyone and start feeling like part of the community. I spent hours deliberating over what to bring before settling on my grandmother's famous potato salad. It was a hit at every gathering back home, and I was sure it would impress my new neighbors. The evening of the potluck arrived, and I made my way to the community center, potato salad in hand. The place was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. Tables groaned under the weight of various dishes, and the air was filled with the mingled aromas of dozens of home-cooked meals. Sarah greeted me at the door, her smile wide and welcoming. "Jenny, so glad you could make it. Oh, is that potato salad? Perfect. We'll put it right here with the other side dishes." I followed her to one of the tables, setting my bowl down next to a suspiciously gray meatloaf and what looked like a Jell-O salad were those chunks of ham suspended in it? I suppressed a shudder. To each their own, I supposed. As I mingled, introducing myself to my new neighbors, I couldn't help but notice how friendly everyone was. Almost too friendly. They all seemed intensely interested in every detail of my life, from my job to my hobbies to my favorite foods. I chalked it up to small-town curiosity and did my best to answer their questions. Finally, Sarah called everyone to attention. "All right, neighbors, the food is ready, so let's eat." There was a flurry of activity as everyone grabbed plates and started loading them up. I hung back a bit, waiting for the initial rush to die down before approaching the buffet. As I filled my plate, I noticed something odd. Despite the wide variety of dishes, everyone seemed to be taking the same things: the gray meatloaf, the ham Jell-O, and a strange, lumpy casserole I couldn't quite identify. I shrugged it off and added a generous helping of my potato salad to my plate before finding a seat at one of the tables. As I took my first bite, I realized the community center had gone oddly quiet. I looked up to find every eye in the room fixed on me. Sarah sat directly across from me, her smile now seeming more predatory than welcoming. "How's the food, Jenny?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how dry my mouth was. "It's good," I managed to say. "Aren't you going to eat?" Sarah's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, we've already eaten. We're just waiting to see how you enjoy your meal." A chill ran down my spine as I looked around the room. Not a single person had touched their food. They were all just watching me. I forced myself to take another bite, trying to act normal even as my heart raced. What was going on here? "You know, Jenny," Sarah said, leaning forward, "we've been so excited to have you join our little community. We've been watching you since you moved in, trying to figure out if you'd be a good fit." "A good fit for what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's eyes glittered in the fluorescent light. "For our family, of course. We're always looking for new members, people who can contribute something special." As she spoke, I became acutely aware of a strange taste in my mouth, something metallic, underneath the familiar flavors of my potato salad. My vision began to blur at the edges. What did you do?" I slurred, my tongue feeling too big for my mouth. Sarah's smile never faltered. "Don't worry, dear. The sedative will kick in fully in a moment. When you wake up, you'll be one of us. Won't that be nice?" I tried to stand, to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The room spun around me as I collapsed to the floor. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was a sea of smiling faces, drawing closer. I woke up different. I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I opened my eyes, I was back in my own bed, in my own house. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible dream, but then I tried to sit up, and everything felt wrong. My body moved stiffly, like I was controlling a marionette, rather than my own limbs. My skin felt too tight, my teeth too big for my mouth, and when I looked in the mirror, the face staring back at me was almost mine, but not quite. The eyes were a shade too bright, the smile a bit too wide. I looked like a photo that had been run through one of those AI enhancement programs, close to reality, but with an uncanny wrongness that made my stomach churn. There was a knock at my door, and Sarah's voice called out cheerfully, "Jenny, are you up? We're all so excited to have you join us for your first day as part of the family." I opened my mouth to scream, to tell her to go away, but what came out instead was, "Coming. I'm so excited to start my new life here in Willow Creek." The words weren't mine. It went to work, chatted with neighbors, even called my parents. All while I screamed silently inside, Unable to warn anyone of what was happening, I learned more about what I had become, or rather, what had become me. They called themselves the family, a hive mind of sorts that had been slowly taking over communities across the country. They looked for isolated areas, places where people might not notice if things started to change. Then they'd move in, replacing the residents one by one with these copies. The potato salad had been the key. My grandmother's secret recipe, passed down through generations, apparently contained a unique combination of enzymes that made it the perfect vehicle for their transformative compound. They had been waiting for someone like me, someone with the right genetic makeup to serve as a bridge between humanity and whatever they were. I was special, they told my body. I was the key to their evolution, the missing link that would allow them to perfect their mimicry of human behavior. With me, they could expand beyond small towns, could start infiltrating cities, governments, spreading across the globe. All the while, the real me remained trapped, a horrified observer in a body I no longer controlled. I tried everything I could think of to break free, to somehow regain control. I screamed in my mind until I was mentally hoarse. I imagined myself fighting, clawing my way back to the surface. Nothing worked. But then, one day, something changed. I was at another neighborhood gathering. The family loved those, using them as opportunities to plan and to revel in their shared consciousness. When a newcomer arrived, he was human, fully human, his movements natural and unpracticed. The thing wearing my skin greeted him warmly, inviting him in, offering him food. I realized with horror that they were planning to do to him what they had done to me. As I watched him take his first bite of the tainted food, something in me snapped. The thought of another person suffering this fate, of being trapped and helpless like I was, sparked something deep inside. A fury, a desperation I hadn't known I was capable of. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated will, I felt something give way. Like a dam breaking, I suddenly rushed back into control of my body. The sensation was overwhelming, every nerve ending firing at once, every muscle tensing and relaxing as I relearned how to inhabit my own skin. I gasped, the sound harsh and foreign after so long being silent. The newcomer looked at me, concern etching his features. "Are you all right?" he asked. I opened my mouth, my real mouth, and screamed, "Run! Don't eat anything! Get out of here now!" Chaos erupted. The other neighbors lunged for me, their faces twisting into expressions of rage that no human muscles should have been capable of. But I was faster, running on pure adrenaline and the desperate need to save at least one person from my fate. I grabbed the newcomer's hand and ran, pulling him out of the house and down the street. Behind us, I could hear the inhuman shrieks of the family, their perfect facade crumbling in the face of their plan's collapse. We ran until our lungs burned, until the manicured lawns of Willow Creek gave way to unkempt fields and then dense forest. Only then did we stop, collapsing to the ground, gasping for air. What was that?" the man panted, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. I shook my head, still marveling at the ability to control my own movements. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I said, "but we need to keep moving. They'll be looking for us." As we set off again, putting as much distance between us and Willow Creek as possible, I couldn't help but wonder, how many other communities had the family infiltrated? How many other people were trapped, silently screaming behind eyes that no longer belonged to them? I didn't have answers, Purnoin, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to find a way to stop them, to save others from the nightmare I had endured, because if I didn't, it was only a matter of time before the family's perfect little communities spread, consuming humanity, one smiling, vacant-eyed neighbor at a time. So if you ever find yourself in a too-perfect neighborhood, where everyone is just a little too friendly and a little too interested in your family recipes, run, and don't look back. Because some families are better left unjoined, and some communities hide monsters behind their white picket fences. And whatever you do, don't eat the potato salad. The child's eyes were what haunted me the most. Cold, empty, and far too knowing for someone so young. I should have trusted my instincts and left them there in the woods. But by the time I realized my mistake, we were already too deep into the forest. And something told me I wasn't the one in control anymore. It was supposed to be a simple hike, a way to clear my head after a grueling week at work. I'd chosen a trail I'd never been on before, seeking a change of scenery. The path was more overgrown than I'd expected, but I enjoyed the challenge, pushing through dense underbrush and clambering over fallen logs. I'd been walking for about an hour when I first heard it. A soft whimper, almost lost beneath the rustle of leaves and chirping of birds. I paused, straining my ears. There it was again, definitely the sound of a child crying. My heart raced as I moved off the trail, towards the sound. Who would leave a child out here alone? As I pushed through a thick cluster of bushes, I saw them. A small figure huddled at the base of a massive oak tree, knees pulled up to their chest. "Hey there," I called softly, not wanting to startle them. "Are you okay?" The child's head snapped up, and I found myself pinned by that unnerving gaze. They couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, with a mop of dark hair and pale skin that seemed almost translucent in the dappled sunlight. "I can't find my brother," the child said, their voice oddly flat. "We were playing hide-and-seek, and now I can't find him." A chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the lack of emotion in their voice, or the way their eyes never seemed to blink. "That's scary," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "How about we look for him together? What's your name?" The child stood, movements fluid and graceful in a way that seemed almost unnatural. "I'm Alice," they said. "And my brother's name is Thomas. He went that way." They pointed deeper into the forest, away from the trail. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to get back to the safety of the marked path. But I couldn't just leave a lost child alone in the woods, could I? "Okay, Alice," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's go find Thomas. But we should be quick. It'll be getting dark soon." Alice nodded, their expression unchanging. Without waiting for me, they set off into the trees, moving with a surety that seemed impossible given the dense undergrowth. I followed, struggling to keep up. The forest seemed to grow thicker with every step, the trees pressing in closer, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The light dimmed, though I was sure it was too early for sunset. "Alice," I called, pushing through a tangle of thorny vines. "Maybe we should head back. We can get help. Have a proper search party look for Thomas." Alice stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into them. They turned, fixing me with that unsettling stare. "We can't go back," they said. "Thomas is close. I can feel it." Before I could respond, they were off again, moving even faster now. I had no choice but to follow, my unease growing with every step. As we walked, I tried to engage Alice in conversation, hoping to distract myself from the growing sense of wrongness that permeated the air. "So, Alice," I said, wincing as a branch whipped across my cheek, "do you and Thomas come to these woods often?" "We've always been here," Alice replied, not turning around. "Always. But surely you have a home, parents." Alice stopped again, and this time when they looked at me, I could have sworn their eyes glowed in the gloom. "Home is a fluid concept, don't you think? As for parents, well, we have the forest." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Right," I managed to croak out. "Shall we keep looking for Thomas, then?" Alice's lips curved into what might have been a smile, if not for the fact that it never reached their eyes. "Oh yes," they said, "let's." We pressed on, deeper and deeper into the forest. I lost all sense of direction, of time. The trees all looked the same, their trunks twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at me as we passed. More than once, I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there when I turned to look. My watch had stopped working, the face blank and lifeless. When I checked my phone, hoping to use the GPS to find our way back, I found it dead as well. "Alice," I said, no longer bothering to hide the tremor in my voice. "I really think we should turn back now. It's not safe to be out here after dark." Alice laughed, a high, tinkling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, but it's always dark here, and we're perfectly safe. The forest protects its own." As if in response to their words, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees with an almost human-like moan. Shadows deepened, twisting into shapes that my mind shied away from comprehending. "What do you mean, its own?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Alice turned to face me fully, and in the fading light, I saw their form shimmer and shift. One moment they were a small child, the next a wizened creature of bark and leaves. Their eyes, though, remained the same, ancient, knowing, and utterly inhuman. "You knew, didn't you?" Alice said, their voice now a rustling whisper like wind through dry leaves. "Deep down, you knew I wasn't what I seemed. Yet you followed me anyway. Humans, always so curious, so eager to help. It makes you such easy prey." I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "What are you?" I gasped. Alice, or the thing that had been Alice, smiled, revealing teeth like sharp thorns. "We are the forest," they said. "We are the shadows between the trees, the whisper in the wind, the eyes that watch from the darkness. And you, my dear, are our newest addition." As they spoke, the forest around us came alive. Trees groaned and shifted, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. Roots erupted from the ground, twining around my ankles. I tried to run, but it was like moving through molasses, every step a monumental effort. "Don't fight it," Alice crooned, their form shifting and swirling like mist. "Embrace the forest. Become one with us. You'll never be alone again." I wanted to scream, to cry for help, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The roots crept higher, wrapping around my legs, my torso, my arms. I could feel the forest's heartbeat pulsing through them, ancient and powerful. As the tendrils of the forest began to seep into my skin, I saw flashes of memory, not my own, but belonging to countless others who had come before me. Lost hikers, curious explorers, all lured deep into the woods by childlike figures with knowing eyes. I saw, too, what awaited me. An eternity as part of the forest consciousness. My individuality slowly eroded away until I was nothing more than another whisper in the wind, another shadow flitting between the trees. With the last of my willpower, I fought against the encroaching forest. I thought of my life, my family, all that I would be leaving behind. I thought of the sun on my face, the feel of rain on my skin, the simple joy of human connection, all the things I would never experience again if I succumbed. Something must have shone in my eyes, because Alice's triumphant expression faltered. "Why do you resist?" they asked, genuine confusion in their voice. "We offer eternity, freedom from pain and loneliness. Why cling to your fleeting human life?" In that moment of distraction, I felt the forest's grip loosen, just slightly. It was enough. With a strength born of desperation, I tore myself free from the grasping roots and ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through undergrowth, leaping over fallen logs, my lungs burning and my legs screaming in protest. Behind me, I could hear the forest's rage, trees groaning, branches snapping, 1,000 inhuman voices wailing in unison. I didn't know if I was going the right way, if there even was a right way anymore. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to find my way out of this nightmare forest before it claimed me for good. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, when my legs were about to give out and my heart felt like it would explode, I saw it. A break in the trees, a glimmer of fading sunlight. With one final, Desperate burst of speed, I threw myself towards the light. As I broke through the tree line, I felt something snap, like an invisible tether being cut. I collapsed onto soft grass, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. When I finally managed to lift my head, I found myself on the edge of a familiar park. In the distance, I could see joggers, dog walkers, families enjoying the last rays of the setting sun. Normal, everyday scenes that now seemed miraculous in their mundanity. I looked back at the forest, half expecting to see twisted, grasping branches reaching for me. But it was just trees, ordinary, non-sentient trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. As my breathing slowed and my heartbeat returned to normal, I wondered if anyone would believe me if I told them what had happened. Probably not. I barely believed it myself, and I'd lived through it. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never go hiking alone again. And if I ever saw a lost child in the woods, especially one with ancient eyes and a too-knowing smile, I would run, and never look back. Because some forests are better left unexplored, and some games of hide-and-seek have stakes higher than anyone could imagine. The first night I heard footsteps in the empty house, I told myself it was just the old pipe settling. By the third night, I knew I wasn't alone, and the truth was far more terrifying than any ghost story. It all started when my best friend, Liz, asked me to house sit for her while she was on a 2-week vacation in Europe. Her place was this gorgeous old Victorian on the outskirts of town, the kind of house I'd always dreamed of owning someday. Of course, I jumped at the chance. It's a big old place, Liz had warned me. It can get a bit creepy at night with all the creaks and groans. But don't worry, it's just the house settling. I laughed it off at the time. I'd grown up in an old house. I was used to the noises they made. Besides, I was looking forward to having some alone time, away from my noisy apartment complex and my even noisier roommates. The first few days were bliss. I worked on my novel during the day, enjoying the peace and quiet of the countryside. In the evenings, I'd curl up in front of the fireplace with a good book, savoring the solitude. It was on the 4th night that things started to feel off. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Soft, measured steps, like someone trying not to be heard. My eyes snapped open, heart racing. I lay there, barely breathing, straining my ears. The footsteps paused outside my door, and I swear I could hear the floorboards creaking as if someone was shifting their weight from foot to foot. After what felt like an eternity, the steps moved on, fading as they went down the stairs. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, in the bright light of day, I felt foolish. It must have been my imagination, I told myself. Or maybe it was just the house settling, like Liz had said. But that night, it happened again. This time, I was in the kitchen making a late-night snack when I heard movement upstairs. It sounded like someone opening and closing drawers, rummaging through things. My hand shook as I picked up my phone to call the police. But what would I tell them? That I heard noises in a house I was supposed to be alone in? They'd probably think I was just another paranoid house sitter, jumping at shadows. Instead, I armed myself with a kitchen knife and crept upstairs. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure anyone in the house would hear it. But when I checked, every room was empty. Drawers were closed, nothing was disturbed. I even checked the closets and under the beds, feeling like a child afraid of monsters. Nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a raccoon or a squirrel that had gotten into the attic. That had to be it. But deep down, I knew. The footsteps I'd heard were too deliberate, too human. The third night, things escalated. I was awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of the shower running. For a moment, in my groggy state, I thought Liz must be home early. But then I remembered. Liz was still in Europe. I was supposed to be alone. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, listening to the water run. After about 5 minutes, it shut off. Then came the footsteps again, this time accompanied by the sound of wet feet slapping against the hardwood floor. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and car keys, fully intending to get the hell out of there and check into a hotel. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, at the bottom of the staircase, was a wet footprint, a single, perfect imprint of a bare human foot. I don't remember running back to my room. The next thing I knew, I was huddled in the corner, my back pressed against the wall, the kitchen knife clutched in my shaking hands. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. The house was silent, peaceful even, but the memory of last night's terror was still fresh. I spent the day in a daze, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. I thought about calling Liz, but what would I say? That her house was haunted? That I was losing my mind? Neither option seemed particularly appealing. As night fell, I steeled myself. I wasn't going to spend another night cowering in fear. I was going to get to the bottom of this, one way or another. I set up my laptop to record video in the upstairs hallway, pointing it towards the stairs. Then I positioned my phone to record the downstairs living room. If anything was moving around this house, I was going to catch it on camera. I settled into bed, my eyes glued to the laptop screen, watching the live feed of the hallway. Hours passed. Nothing happened. My eyelids grew heavy, and despite my best efforts, I found myself drifting off. A loud thud jerked me awake. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. On the laptop screen, I saw a figure dart past the camera. It was too quick, too blurry to make out details, but it was unmistakably human-shaped. I switched to the feed from my phone downstairs. The living room was empty, but as I watched, a shadow moved across the wall. Someone was down there, moving just out of frame. My hands shook as I dialed 911. This time, I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. There was someone in the house with me. 911, what's your emergency? There's an intruder in my house, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please send someone quickly. Stay calm, ma'am. Can you get to a safe place? Before I could answer, I heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Coming up. Coming towards me. They're coming. I breathed into the phone. Oh God, they're coming. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. Police are on their way. Can you lock your door? But I was beyond hearing. The footsteps were right outside my door now. I could see the shadow of feet in the gap beneath. The doorknob turned slowly. I closed my eyes, bracing for whatever was about to come through that door. Jenny, are you okay? My eyes snapped open. Standing in the doorway, looking concerned and a little confused, was Liz. Liz, I stammered. What? How? You're supposed to be in Europe. She stepped into the room, and I noticed she was dripping wet, wrapped in a towel. I came home early. Didn't you get my messages? I've been trying to reach you all day. As the adrenaline drained from my system, leaving me shaky and weak, I glanced at my phone. Sure enough, there were a dozen missed calls and messages from Liz. But the footsteps, the noises. Liz's brow furrowed. What noises? Jenny, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. I thought there was an intruder. I've been hearing noises for days. Understanding dawned on Liz's face. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you. This old house, it carries sound in weird ways. You can hear everything from the guest house out back. My cousin's been staying there while I was away. He must have been the one you heard. As Liz explained, I felt a mix of relief and embarrassment wash over me. All this time, all my fear and paranoia, and it was just someone staying in a guest house I didn't even know existed. The police arrived a few minutes later, responding to my 911 call. There was a lot of explaining to do, and more than a little embarrassment on my part. But in the end, everyone had a good laugh about it. The paranoid house sitter, spooked by perfectly innocent noises. Looking back now, I can laugh about it too. But in the moment, those nights alone in that big old house were the most terrifying of my life. I learned a valuable lesson. Always get all the details before agreeing to house a sit. And maybe, just maybe, ghost stories are popular for a reason. Our minds are all too ready to jump to the supernatural when faced with the unknown. But I also learned something else. That primal fear. That bone-deep terror of the unknown. The unseen threat lurking in the shadows. It's not so easily shaken off. Even now, months later, I still sometimes wake in the night, heart racing. Sure, I've heard footsteps in an empty house. Because the thing is, even though it all turned out to be a misunderstanding, for a few nights, my fear was real. And that kind of fear, once you've experienced it, never really goes away. It just waits, lurking in the dark corners of your mind, ready to resurface at the slightest creak in the night. So, the next time you're alone in a strange house and you hear an unexpected noise, well, it's probably nothing. Probably. The package was ordinary, brown and unremarkable, but the note inside turned my world upside down. I've been watching you. Your time is running out. Those 11 words were the beginning of a nightmare I'm still trying to wake up from. It started on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day, just another monotonous shift at the bookstore where I worked. I remember I was shelving new arrivals in the mystery section, chuckling at the irony of stocking thriller novels while my own life was so mundane. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see a delivery guy. Nothing unusual there. We got shipments all the time. But this package wasn't for the store. It was for me. "Delivery for Sarah Collins," he said, holding out a small brown box. I frowned, confused. I hadn't ordered anything. "That's me, but I'm not expecting a package." He shrugged, clearly uninterested. "Just need a signature, ma'am." I signed for it, turning the box over in my hands. No return address, just my name and the store's address printed in neat, block letters. Curiosity got the better of me. I retreated to the break room and carefully opened the package. Inside was a single sheet of paper with those 11 chilling words. My first instinct was to laugh it off. Probably just a prank, right? Maybe one of my friends trying to spice up my boring life with a little mystery. But as I read the note again, a cold feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and something about the tone felt off. Not like a joke at all. I shoved the note back in the box and tried to forget about it. But throughout the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every customer that came in, every passerby on the street outside, were they the one? Were they watching me? By the time I locked up that night, my nerves were frayed. The walk to my apartment, usually a pleasant 10-minute stroll, felt like running a gauntlet. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. I double-checked the locks on my door, then spent a restless night tossing and turning, jumping at every creak and groan of my old building. The next morning, I almost convinced myself I had overreacted. In the light of day, the note seemed less menacing. I went about my routine, shower, coffee, breakfast, trying to shake off the lingering unease. As I was about to leave for work, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, tucked under my welcome mat, was another note. With shaking hands, I unfolded it. "Blue looks good on you, but I prefer the red shirt you wore last Thursday." My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor. This wasn't a prank. Someone was really watching me. Had been for who knows how long. And they knew where I lived. I called in sick to work, then spent the next hour going through my apartment, checking every closet, every possible hiding spot. I found nothing out of place, but that didn't ease my fear. If anything, it made it worse. How were they getting this information? I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? I had no proof, no threats of violence, just two creepy notes that could easily be explained away as a bad joke. Instead, I called my best friend, Lisa. She listened patiently as I poured out the whole story, my voice cracking with barely suppressed panic. "Sarah, honey, breathe," she said when I finished. "Have you changed any of your routines lately? Done anything out of the ordinary?" I thought back over the past few weeks. Same job, same schedule, same everything. "No," I said. "Nothing's changed." "Okay," Lisa said, her voice calm and steady. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm coming over. We'll go through your place together, see if we can find any cameras or anything suspicious. Then we'll figure out our next move." Her pragmatism helped ground me. By the time she arrived, I had managed to stop shaking, though my heart still raced every time I heard a noise in the hallway. We spent hours combing through my small apartment. We checked every vent, every light fixture, even unscrewed the faceplates of electrical outlets. Nothing. "Maybe it is just someone playing a sick joke," Lisa said as we collapsed onto my couch, exhausted. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew this was real. The level of detail in that second note, they had to be watching me somehow. That night, Lisa stayed over. We locked all the windows, drew all the curtains, and tried to distract ourselves with movies and junk food. But every unexpected noise made us jump, and I kept finding myself glancing nervously at the door. The next morning, I woke up to find Lisa already in the kitchen, making coffee. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I saw her face. "Sarah," she said, her voice tight. "There's another one." This time, the note had been slipped under my front door sometime in the night. My hands trembled as I read it. "Your friend can't protect you. I'll always be watching." Lisa wanted to go to the police right then, but I hesitated. What if they didn't believe us? What if involving them made things worse? "At least let me stay with you for a while," Lisa pleaded. "You shouldn't be alone right now." I agreed, grateful for her support. We fell into a routine over the next few days. Lisa would go to work, and I would stay in the apartment, too terrified to leave. We changed the locks, installed a security camera in the hallway, but the notes kept coming. They appeared in impossible places, inside my laptop bag, tucked into the pages of the book I was reading, once even in the pocket of a jacket I hadn't worn in months. Each one was more personal, more intrusive than the last. They mentioned conversations I'd had in private, thoughts I'd only written in my journal. It was like the stalker could see into my very mind. A week into this nightmare, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every shadow, every reflection seemed to hide my unseen tormentor. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. That's when the final note came. It was waiting on my pillow when I woke up, though I know I checked the room thoroughly before going to bed. Just 3 words this time. "Time's up, Sarah." I ran. Didn't even pack a bag. Just grabbed my phone and my wallet and fled the apartment. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I ended up at the police station, babbling incoherently about stalkers and notes and hidden cameras. The officer on duty was kind, patient. He took my statement, collected the notes I had kept as evidence. They assigned a detective to my case, a no-nonsense woman named Rodriguez. She listened to my story without judgment, asked pointed questions about anyone who might have a grudge against me. "We'll figure this out," she assured me. "In the meantime, we'll have a patrol car keep an eye on your apartment. And I'd strongly suggest staying with a friend or family member." I moved in with Lisa that day. We thought it would be temporary, just until the police caught the stalker. But days turned into weeks. And still, there were no leads. The notes stopped, but that almost made it worse. Now every moment was filled with dread, wondering when the next one would appear, what it would say. I couldn't go back to my old life. I quit my job, rarely left Lisa's apartment. My world shrank to four walls and a constant, gnawing fear. It's been 2 months now. The police investigation has stalled. They've interviewed everyone in my life, checked security footage, even brought in a handwriting expert. Nothing. Detective Rodriguez says it happens sometimes. Stalkers just stop, move on to a new target. I should be relieved, she tells me. But how can I be? How can I ever feel safe again, knowing someone out there knows everything about me, has access to my most private moments? I jump at every unexpected noise. I flinch when strangers get too close. I check and recheck locks, peer out windows, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because the truth is, I don't believe it's over. Whoever was watching me, whoever sent those notes, they're still out there. And deep down, I know they're not done with me yet. So I wait, caught in this limbo of fear and anticipation. And I wonder, when will the next package arrive? What will the next note say? And most terrifying of all, what happens when my time really does run out? The silhouette stood motionless outside my tent, a dark sentinel against the pale moonlight. I held my breath, praying it was just a trick of the shadows. But as the seconds ticked by, the figure remained, watching, waiting. And I realized with growing horror that I was trapped, miles from help, with something that was far from human. I've always been a solitary person. That's why I loved camping alone. Just me, my gear, and the vast wilderness stretching out in every direction. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no constant pings and notifications. Pure, unadulterated solitude. This particular trip was supposed to be a week-long trek through the backcountry of Yellowstone. I'd spent months planning it, poring over maps, meticulously packing my supplies. I was prepared for everything, or so I thought. The first 3 days were bliss. I hiked from sunrise to sunset, marveling at the untouched beauty around me. Each night, I'd set up camp, cook a simple meal over my portable stove, and fall asleep to the gentle chorus of crickets and distant wolf howls. It was on the 4th night that everything changed. I'd found a perfect clearing to set up camp, nestled between a babbling creek and a stand of towering pines. As I was pitching my tent, I noticed something odd. A strange silence had fallen over the forest. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the creek seemed to have muted its cheerful gurgle. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Probably just a predator passing through the area, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. I finished setting up camp and crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight against the cool night air. Despite the unusual quiet, I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the physical exhaustion of the day's hike. I'm not sure what woke me. There was no sound, no sudden movement, just an overwhelming sense of wrongness that jolted me from a deep sleep to full alertness in an instant. The silence was absolute now. No wind in the trees, no water in the creek. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. And then I saw it. The silhouette, perfectly still, just outside my tent. Human-shaped, but too tall, too thin to be natural. It stood there, motionless, its featureless head turned towards my tent. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it must be audible. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A bear standing on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong. Another camper? But who would stand so still for so long, outside a stranger's tent? Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. It just watched. I weighed my options. I could call out, but if it was a person with ill intentions, that would only alert them that I was awake and aware. I could try to make a run for it, but my hiking boots were outside the tent, and I'd never get far barefoot in the rocky terrain. So I lay there, barely daring to breathe, hoping against hope that whatever it was would eventually leave. It didn't. As the night wore on, my fear began to mix with an odd sort of fascination. What was this thing? Why was it here? What did it want? Just when I thought I couldn't take the tension anymore, when I was on the verge of screaming just to break the awful silence, it moved. Slowly, so slowly I almost missed it at first. The figure began to sink into the ground. It didn't bend or crouch. It simply descended, as if being lowered through some invisible trapdoor. Within moments, it was gone, leaving no trace behind. I'd like to say I sprang into action then, that I packed up my gear and hiked out of there as fast as my legs could carry me. But the truth is, I was paralyzed with fear. I lay in my sleeping bag, eyes wide open, until the first rays of dawn began to lighten the sky. Only then did I emerge from my tent, half expecting to see some sign of the night's visitation, footprints, disturbed earth, anything. But there was nothing. The clearing looked exactly as it had the evening before. If it weren't for the lingering terror that made my hands shake as I packed up camp, I might have convinced myself it was all a vivid nightmare. I abandoned my carefully planned route and headed for the nearest ranger station, pushing myself to hike faster than I ever had before. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed. It took me 2 days to reach the station. 2 days of constant fear, of looking over my shoulder, of startling at every shadow. I barely slept, too afraid to close my eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. When I finally stumbled into the station, wild-eyed and babbling about impossibly tall figures in the night, the rangers exchanged worried glances. They probably thought I was delirious from dehydration or had eaten some questionable berries. They called in a medic to check me over, but of course, they found nothing physically wrong with me. How could they? The wounds were all in my mind, in the shattered sense of safety I'd once felt in the wilderness. I gave them a vague story about getting spooked by some wildlife, too embarrassed to tell them the full truth. They offered to call someone for me, but I declined. Who would I call? Who would believe me? I hitched a ride back to civilization with a supply truck the next day. As we drove away from the park, I kept my eyes fixed on the receding tree line, half expecting to see that tall, thin figure emerge from the woods. It's been months now, and I still wake up some nights in a cold sweat, convinced I can see that silhouette standing at the foot of my bed. I've tried to rationalize it. A hallucination brought on by isolation, a wild animal distorted by moonlight and fear. But deep down, I know what I saw was real and inexplicable. I haven't been camping since. Haven't even been able to go for a hike in the local park without feeling a creeping dread. The solitude I once craved now feels threatening, loaded with potential danger. I've scoured the internet, looking for similar stories. There are a few. Vague accounts of hikers seeing strange figures in the woods, of inexplicable silences falling over bustling forests, but nothing concrete, nothing that fully matches my experience. Sometimes in my darker moments, I wonder if it followed me home. If even now, it's out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. I keep my curtains drawn at night, unable to shake the fear of seeing that impossibly tall, thin shape silhouetted against the streetlights. I know how it sounds. I know most people would say I imagined it, or that I'm blowing an encounter with a normal animal out of proportion. But they weren't there. They didn't feel the unnatural stillness, didn't see the way it sank into the ground as if the laws of physics didn't apply. So I stay in the city now, surrounded by the constant noise and light of urban life. No more solitary adventures, no more communing with nature. It should feel safe, being around people all the time, but it doesn't, because now I know that there are things out there in the darkness, things that watch and wait with inhuman patience. And the most terrifying part, I don't know what they're waiting for. What happens when their vigil ends? What were they preparing for out there in the wilderness? I fear I'll find out one day, that I'll wake up in the middle of the night to find that silhouette in my room, no longer content to simply watch. And on that night, I'll finally learn why it chose me, why it followed me, why it waited. Until then, I live with the knowledge that the wilderness I once loved hides secrets darker and stranger than I ever imagined. And I wonder, how many other campers, hikers, and adventurers have seen what I saw? How many of them are out there now, living with the same fear, the same questions? So if you're planning a solo camping trip, if you're yearning for that perfect solitude in nature, remember my story. And if you wake up one night to find an unnatural silence has fallen over the forest, if you see a tall, thin silhouette standing motionless outside your tent, don't wait to find out what it wants. Run, run, and don't look back, because some things in this world are better left unwatched, unencountered, and unexplained. And they're out there, waiting in the darkness, for the unwary to stumble upon them. The moment I saw myself on the security camera footage, sleeping peacefully in my bed while a stranger moved silently through my apartment, I knew my life would never be the same. Someone had been living in my home, watching me, for weeks, and I had no idea. It started with little things, so small I almost didn't notice. A coffee mug out of place, the TV remote on the wrong side of the couch, my favorite sweater, which I could have sworn I'd thrown in the laundry basket, folded neatly on my dresser. At first, I chalked it up to absent-mindedness. I'd been working long hours at the law firm, often coming home so exhausted I could barely remember my own name, let alone where I'd left things. It wasn't until I found a half-eaten sandwich in my fridge, one I knew I hadn't made, that I started to worry. "You're being paranoid," my best friend, Jen, told me over the phone. "You probably just forgot you made it. When was the last time you got a full night's sleep?" She had a point. Between the big case at work and my habit of binge-watching true crime documentaries until the wee hours of the morning, sleep had become a luxury. So I tried to brush it off, to convince myself I was just overtired and imagining things. But the incidents kept piling up. My shampoo bottle emptying faster than it should, the subtle rearrangement of books on my shelves, the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne in my bedroom. It was the cologne that finally pushed me over the edge. I knew I wasn't crazy. Someone had been in my apartment, in my personal space. The question was, how? I didn't want to call the police. What would I tell them? That I suspected someone was sneaking into my apartment to use my shampoo and rearrange my books? They'd laugh me out of the station. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to an electronics store and bought a small wireless security camera. It was easy to set up, designed to blend in with my decor. I positioned it in my living room, angled to capture most of the apartment, including the entrance to my bedroom. For the first few days, nothing happened. The camera captured only my mundane routine, leaving for work, coming home, microwaving dinner, falling asleep on the couch. I started to feel silly for having bought it in the first place. Then, on the fourth night, everything changed. I was reviewing the footage before bed, more out of habit than expectation at this point. The video showed me asleep on the couch, some late-night infomercial playing softly on the TV. Suddenly, the front door opened. My heart leapt into my throat as I watched a figure enter my apartment. They moved with the confidence of someone who knew the space well, navigating around furniture without hesitation. The stranger, I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman in the dim light, went straight to my kitchen, opened the fridge, and helped themselves to my leftover Chinese takeout. I felt sick. This person wasn't just entering my apartment. They were living here, treating it like their own home. The footage showed the intruder eating at my dining table, using my dishes, even flipping through a magazine I'd left out. After about an hour, they cleaned up, washing the dish and putting it away, and then did something that chilled me to my core. They walked over to where I was sleeping on the couch, stood there for a long moment just watching me, then gently draped a blanket over me before retreating to my bedroom. I sat there staring at my phone long after the video ended, my mind reeling. Someone had been in my home, inches away from me while I slept, vulnerable and unaware. The violation I felt was indescribable. With shaking hands, I called the police. This time I had proof. The officers arrived quickly, their faces grim as they watched the footage. They did a thorough search of my apartment but found no sign of the intruder. No forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. "Do you have any idea who this could be?" one of the officers asked. "An ex, maybe? Someone with a grudge?" I shook my head. I'd been single for years, and while I'm sure I'd annoyed some people at work, I couldn't imagine anyone going to these lengths. They took my statement, collected the video evidence, and promised to increase patrols in the area. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. Without catching the person in the act, there wasn't much they could do. I couldn't stay in the apartment. The thought of sleeping there, knowing someone could come in at any moment, was unbearable. I packed a bag and went to stay with Jen, who was appropriately horrified when I showed her the video. "Oh my God, Sarah," she breathed. "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid in my own home. But I also couldn't just pick up and move. My job, my life, everything was here. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with trying to catch the intruder. I installed more cameras, set up motion sensors, even considered hiring a private investigator. But it was like chasing a ghost. The person never returned, at least not while the cameras were running. I started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and paranoia that had become constant companions. Dr. Reeves listened patiently as I poured out my fears, my feelings of violation and helplessness. "Sarah," she said gently during one session, "have you considered the possibility that this person might not be a stranger?" I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The level of familiarity they showed with your apartment, the way they moved around, it suggests someone who knows you, who's been there before." My mind raced, flipping through a mental Rolodex of everyone who'd ever been to my apartment. Friends, colleagues, maintenance workers, but none of them fit. None of them would do this. Would they? As the weeks turned into months with no new incidents, I slowly began to relax. I moved back into my apartment, though I kept the cameras running. I started sleeping through the night again, stopped jumping at every creak and groan of the building, but the experience had changed me. I was warier now, more guarded. I found myself studying the people around me, wondering if any of them could be capable of such a profound betrayal of trust. And then, just when I thought it was all behind me, it happened again. I woke up one morning to find my coffee already made, steam rising gently from my favorite mug on the kitchen counter. Next to it was a note, written in an unfamiliar hand. "I've missed you. Welcome home." The cameras had caught nothing. The doors were still locked, the windows secure. It was as if the intruder had materialized out of thin air. I'm writing this now from a hotel room, my few hastily packed belongings scattered around me. I don't know what to do next, where to go. The police are as baffled as I am. My friends think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw. I know someone has been living in my home, sharing my space without my knowledge or consent. And the worst part is, I don't think they're done. This doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like the beginning of something much darker, much more terrifying. So I'll keep running, keep looking over my shoulder, because somewhere out there is a person who knows every detail of my life, who can slip in and out of my home like a ghost. And until I find them, until I understand why they chose me, I'll never truly be safe. If you're reading this, take a good look around your home tonight. Check those little spaces you never think about. The attic, the crawl spaces, the forgotten corners of your closets, because you never know who might be watching, waiting for the moment you let your guard down. And to the person who's been living in my home, I will find you. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. My car sputtered to a stop on that desolate stretch of highway, and as the headlights of the approaching truck illuminated the darkness, I felt a surge of relief. Little did I know, accepting that ride would be the biggest mistake of my life. It had been a long day. I'd driven for hours, attending my cousin's wedding 3 states over. The reception had dragged on, and despite my initial plan to stay overnight, I decided to head home. "I'll be fine," I told my worried relatives. "I've done longer drives before." Stupid, stubborn me. The first few hours were uneventful. I sang along to the radio, windows down, enjoying the cool night air. But as midnight approached, fatigue began to set in. I should have stopped, found a motel, but I was more than halfway home. Just a couple more hours, I told myself. Then, without warning, my car started to lose power. The engine coughed and sputtered, and I barely managed to coast onto the shoulder before it died completely. I sat there for a moment, stunned, as the reality of my situation sank in. Middle of nowhere. Dead of night. No cell service. I popped the hood, though I knew it was futile. I wouldn't know a carburetor from a catalytic converter if my life depended on it. And as I stood there, staring helplessly at the enigma of my car's inner workings, I heard it, the low rumble of an approaching vehicle. Relief washed over me as I saw headlights pierce the darkness. A large pickup truck slowed as it neared, then pulled over just ahead of my car. A man got out, approaching with a friendly wave. "Car trouble," he called out. I nodded, trying not to let my desperation show. "Yeah, it just died on me, and my phone's not getting any signal out here." He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a weathered face and calloused hands that spoke of a life of manual labor. "That's rough," he said, peering under my hood. "Looks like your alternator might be shot. You're not going anywhere tonight, I'm afraid." My heart sank. "Is there a town nearby, or a gas station?" He shook his head. "Nothing for miles. But listen, I'm heading into the city. I could give you a ride if you want. There's a 24-hour diner just off the highway. You could call for a tow from there." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to get into a car with a stranger, especially not out here in the middle of nowhere. But what choice did I have? Stay here and hope another car would come along? "That would be great," I heard myself say. "Thank you so much." He helped me grab my purse and a small overnight bag from my car, then ushered me to his truck. As I slid into the passenger seat, I noticed how clean it was. Almost too clean, like it had been recently detailed. "I'm John, by the way," he said as he pulled back onto the highway. "Rachel," I replied, fastening my seatbelt. "Thanks again for stopping. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." He waved off my thanks. "No problem at all. Couldn't just leave you stranded out there, could I?" We drove in silence for a few minutes. I watched the mile markers fly by, trying to gauge how far we'd gone. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Then it hit me. We were going the wrong way. Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we might be going the wrong direction. The next town should be east of where my car broke down." John's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white. "Oh, don't worry about that," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "We're going exactly where we need to go." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Where are you taking me?" He didn't answer, just pressed down harder on the accelerator. The speedometer crept up, 70, 75, 80. Panic set in. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Child locks, I realized with a sinking feeling. I was trapped. "Please," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Just let me out. I won't tell anyone, I swear." John laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweetheart, we're way past that now." I looked out the window, trying to get my bearings, but all I could see was darkness. punctuated by the occasional blur of a road sign. We were far from the highway now, on some back road I didn't recognize. My mind raced, trying to remember all those self-defense tips I'd read online but never really paid attention to. Go for the eyes, kick the groin. But how was I supposed to do any of that from the passenger seat of a speeding truck? As if reading my mind, John spoke again. Don't even think about trying anything. You're not going anywhere until I say so. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. I needed to stay alert, to look for any opportunity to escape. We drove for what felt like hours, the landscape outside growing more and more desolate. Finally, the truck slowed, turning onto a dirt road that led into a dense forest. This was it, I realized with a sickening jolt. Whatever he had planned for me, it was going to happen here. The truck rolled to a stop in a small clearing. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, John turned to face me. "End of the line, Rachel," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Time to get out." I shook my head, pressing myself back against the seat. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." His face hardened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He reached for me, his hand closing around my arm in a vice-like grip. In that moment, something in me snapped. All the fear, all the anger, all the helplessness I'd been feeling coalesced into a surge of desperate energy. As he pulled me towards him, I lashed out with everything I had. My nails raked across his face, drawing blood. He yelled, more in surprise than pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to yank my arm free. I threw myself at the door, fumbling with the handle. By some miracle, it opened. He must have unlocked it to drag me out. I tumbled onto the ground, scraping my knees and palms on the rough dirt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I scrambled to my feet and ran, plunging into the darkness of the forest. Behind me, I could hear John cursing, the truck door slamming. The beam of a flashlight cut through the trees, searching. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. All I knew was that I had to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as possible. Finally, when I felt like I couldn't take another step, I allowed myself to stop. I leaned against a tree, gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. Nothing, just the quiet sounds of the forest at night. I slid down to the ground, my back against the rough bark, and let the tears come. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I was alive. I had escaped, but I was lost in the middle of nowhere, with no idea where I was, and a madman potentially still looking for me. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation set in. I was dressed for a wedding, not a trek through the wilderness. My thin jacket did little to ward off the chill of the night air. My feet, clad in impractical heels, were already aching and blistered. But I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to find help. I forced myself to my feet, wincing at the pain. Picking a direction at random, away from where I thought the clearing was, I started walking. The forest seemed endless. Every tree looked the same in the darkness. I stumbled frequently, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. More than once I thought I heard footsteps behind me, causing me to freeze in terror. But it was always just the wind in the leaves, or some small animal scurrying away. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A break in the trees ahead. I quickened my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. I emerged from the forest onto the shoulder of a road. It was narrow and empty, but it was civilization. I could have cried with relief. I didn't know which way to go, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I picked a direction and started walking, my thumb out in case any early morning drivers passed by. It was over an hour before I saw headlights approaching. I waved frantically, praying it wasn't John, that I hadn't somehow walked in a circle back to where I started. The car slowed, then stopped. An older couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance. I shook my head, tears welling up again. "No," I managed to choke out. "I need help. Please." They ushered me into the back seat, wrapping me in a blanket they had stashed there. As we drove toward the nearest town, I haltingly explained what had happened, leaving out the worst details. The couple exchanged worried glances. "We need to get you to the police," the man said, reaching for his phone. I nodded, finally feeling safe for the first time in hours. The next few days were a blur of police statements, hospital checks, and tearful reunions with family and friends. John was never found. The truck had been stolen, the license plate swapped. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I know I'm lucky. I know it could have been so much worse. But the fear lingers. I jump at unexpected noises. I can't bring myself to get into a car with a stranger. The forest, once a place I loved, now fills me with dread. But I'm healing, slowly. I'm reclaiming my life, piece by piece. And I'm sharing my story, hoping it might help someone else stay safe. Because the scariest part of all of this, it started just like any other night. It could have happened to anyone. So please, be careful out there. Trust your instincts. And never, ever assume it can't happen to you. Because sometimes, the difference between a fun night out and a nightmare is just one wrong turn. The day I caught my neighbor staring into my bedroom window at 3 a.m., I knew the friendly guy next door act was just that, an act. But I had no idea how deep the deception went, or how much danger I was really in. I'd moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood just 6 months ago, eager for a fresh start after my divorce. The house was perfect, a charming 2-story with a white picket fence and a backyard that backed up to a small wooded area. It was everything I'd dreamed of, a far cry from the cramped city apartment I'd shared with my ex. Todd, my next-door neighbor, was one of the first people to welcome me. He showed up the day after I moved in, bearing a plate of homemade cookies and offers to help with any heavy lifting. He was in his mid-40s, I guessed, with a kind face and an easy smile. Just the sort of neighbor you'd hope for in a place like this. Over the next few months, Todd became a constant, if unobtrusive, presence in my life. He'd wave as I left for work in the morning, offer to mow my lawn when he did his own, and occasionally invite me over for backyard barbecues with other neighbors. It was nice, I thought, to have such a friendly face nearby. But then, little things started to feel off. It began with the feeling of being watched. I'd be in my kitchen, making dinner, and get the prickly sensation on the back of my neck that someone was looking at me. I'd glance out the window, only to see Todd quickly averting his gaze, suddenly very interested in trimming his hedges or checking his mailbox. I tried to brush it off. He was probably just being neighborly, I told myself. Maybe a bit overeager, but harmless. Then I started noticing other things. My garden gnome would be in a slightly different position when I got home from work. The wind chimes I'd hung on my back porch would be tangled, though there hadn't been any strong breezes. Once, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move past my living room window late at night. Each incident on its own was easy to explain away. But together, they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uneasy. I started being more cautious. I double-checked my locks at night, kept my curtains drawn more often. I even considered installing a security system, but I felt silly. Was I really going to go to all that trouble because of a few odd occurrences and an overly friendly neighbor? Then came the night that changed everything. I'd been having trouble sleeping, tossing and turning in the summer heat. Around 3 a.m., I got up to get a glass of water. As I passed my bedroom window, movement caught my eye. There, illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlight, was Todd. He was standing in his backyard, staring directly into my window. When he saw me, he didn't even flinch or look away. He just smiled. Smiled. My blood ran cold. This wasn't neighborly. This wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate, and it was terrifying. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Todd was nowhere to be seen. The officers took my statement, but I could tell they weren't taking it too seriously. No crime had been committed after all, just a neighbor in his own yard, no matter how creepy the circumstances. The next day, Todd acted as if nothing had happened. He waved cheerily as I left for work, called out a friendly, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I forced a smile and a nod, my skin crawling. That evening, I decided to do some digging. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Todd than met the eye. A quick internet search turned up nothing unusual, no criminal record, no news articles. He seemed, on paper at least, to be exactly what he appeared. A middle-aged bachelor with a steady job and a quiet life. But something still felt wrong. On a hunch, I decided to check out his backyard. I waited until dusk, when I was sure he'd gone inside for the night. Then, feeling like a criminal myself, I slipped through the gap in our shared fence. Todd's yard was immaculate, every blade of grass perfectly trimmed, every flower in its place. It was almost too perfect, like a movie set rather than a lived-in space. As I crept closer to the house, I noticed something odd about the basement windows. They were covered from the inside with what looked like thick black paper, not a sliver of light escaping. My curiosity got the better of me. I inched closer, trying to peer through a tiny gap where the paper didn't quite meet the window frame. What I saw made my heart stop. The basement was full of monitors, each showing a different room of my house. My living room, my kitchen, my bedroom, all on display. And there, in the center of it all, sat Todd, watching intently. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How long had he been watching me? How had he gotten cameras into my house? In my shock, I wasn't as careful as I should have been. My elbow knocked over a potted plant, the crash echoing in the quiet evening. I froze, praying Todd hadn't heard. But a moment later, I heard footsteps inside the house, moving quickly. I ran, back through the gap in the fence, into my house, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police again, when I hesitated. What if Todd had some way to listen in on my calls? What if he had already erased the evidence in his basement? Would the police believe me this time, or would I come across as the crazy, paranoid neighbor? I needed proof. And more than that, I needed to understand why. Why me? What was Todd's endgame? Over the next week, I played a dangerous game. On the surface, I acted normal, even friendly towards Todd. But every moment I was home, I was searching for hidden cameras, for microphones, for any evidence of his invasion of my privacy. I found more than I ever wanted to. Tiny cameras hidden in smoke detectors, in picture frames, even in the showerhead. Microphones tucked into light fixtures and air vents. My entire life had been on display, and I'd had no idea. But I still didn't know why. What was Todd getting out of this? Was he just a voyeur, or was there something more sinister at play? I got my answer in the most horrifying way possible. 10 days after I discovered Todd's surveillance, I came home from work to find my front door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, I entered cautiously, a heavy vase clutched in my hand as a makeshift weapon. The house was a mess, drawers pulled out, contents strewn about, but nothing seemed to be missing. This wasn't a robbery, it was a search. A noise from upstairs made me freeze. Soft footsteps, the creak of a floorboard. Someone was still here. I should have run, should have called the police. But anger and a desperate need for answers propelled me forward. I crept up the stairs, vase at the ready. The noise was coming from my bedroom. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, then burst through the door. Todd stood there, holding a small black notebook, my journal. He didn't even look surprised to see me. Instead, he smiled that same creepy smile I'd seen that night through my window. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You're smarter than the others. They never noticed." A chill ran down my spine. "Others?" Todd's smile widened. "Oh yes. You're not the first, you know. But you might be the last. I think I've finally found what I've been looking for." He took a step towards me, and I raised the vase, ready to swing. But before either of us could move, the sound of sirens cut through the air, growing louder by the second. Todd's face contorted with rage. "You called them. You ruined everything." He lunged at me, but years of self-defense classes kicked in. I swung the vase, connecting solidly with the side of his head. He went down hard, the journal falling from his grasp. I snatched it up just as the police burst through the front door downstairs. "Up here," I yelled, my voice shaking. The next few hours were a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and shocking revelations. The journal contained detailed notes not just on me, but on at least 5 other women. Women who had lived in my house before me, who had no idea they were being watched, studied, cataloged like specimens in a twisted experiment. Todd, it turned out, had been doing this for years, buying houses, renting them out to single women, and observing them through elaborate surveillance systems. For what purpose, he never fully revealed. But the level of detail in his notes, the obsessive documentation of every aspect of his victims' lives, spoke of a disturbed mind with terrifying plans. I was lucky, the police told me. I had figured it out sooner than the others. I had fought back. I had survived. But even now, months later, I don't feel lucky. I feel violated, paranoid, forever changed by the knowledge that for months, my most private moments were on display for a madman's entertainment. I've moved, of course, far away from that quiet suburban street with its perfect lawns and friendly neighbors. I live in the city now, in a building with security and lots of people around. But I still check for cameras every time I enter a new room. I still flinch when I catch a neighbor looking my way. Because the truth is, you never really know who's watching. The friendly face next door might be hiding the darkest of secrets. And sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones hiding in plain sight, waving to you over a perfectly manicured hedge, offering you cookies with a smile that never quite reaches their eyes. So the next time you get that prickly feeling of being watched, don't ignore it. Don't explain it away. Because your instincts might just save your life. And always check your smoke detectors. The truck's headlights pierced through the fog, a beacon of hope on the deserted road. As it slowed to a stop beside my broken-down car, relief washed over me. Little did I know, I was about to step into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. It had been a long day. I'd driven for hours to attend a job interview in the city, my hopes high for a fresh start after months of unemployment. The interview had gone well, but the journey back was taking its toll. As night fell, fatigue began to set in, my eyelids growing heavy with each passing mile. I should have stopped, found a motel for the night, but I was eager to get home, to tell my parents about the interview, to sleep in my own bed. Just a couple more hours, I told myself. I can make it. That's when my car started making strange noises. A rattling at first, then a whining that grew louder with each passing minute. I tried to ignore it, praying it would hold out until I reached the next town. But fate had other plans. With a final sputter and a plume of smoke from under the hood, my car gave up. I coasted to the shoulder, the gravel crunching under my tires as I came to a stop. No, I muttered, turning the key in the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. I slumped back in my seat, fighting back tears of frustration. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. I reached for my phone, only to find the battery dead. Of course, because why would anything go right tonight? For a long moment, I just sat there, unsure what to do. The road was deserted at this hour, no other cars in sight. I was miles from the nearest town, and walking along the road at night seemed like a recipe for disaster. That's when I saw the headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. Relief flooded through me as the truck slowed, pulling onto the shoulder behind me. A man got out, approaching my window. He looked to be in his mid-50s, with a weathered face and calloused hands that spoke of a life of manual labor. "Car trouble?" he asked as I rolled down my window. I nodded, trying not to let my desperation show. "Yeah, it just died on me, and my phone's dead, so I can't even call for help." He smiled sympathetically. "That's rough. Listen, I'm heading into town. I could give you a ride to the nearest gas station if you want. They might have a tow truck you could call." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to get into a vehicle with a stranger. But what choice did I have? Stay here and hope another good Samaritan came along. "That would be great," I heard myself say. "Thank you so much." He helped me grab my purse and jacket from the car, then ushered me to his truck. As I slid into the passenger seat, I noticed how clean it was. Almost too clean, like it had been recently detailed. "I'm John, by the way," he said as he pulled back onto the road. "Sarah," I replied, fastening my seatbelt. "Thanks again for stopping. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." He waved off my thanks. "No problem at all. Couldn't just leave you stranded out there, could I?" We drove in silence for a few minutes. I watched the mile markers fly by, trying to gauge how far we'd gone. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Then it hit me. We were going the wrong way. Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we might be going the wrong direction. The next town should be east of where my car broke down." John's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white. "Oh, don't worry about that," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "We're going exactly where we need to go." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Where are you taking me?" He didn't answer, just pressed down harder on the accelerator. The speedometer crept up. 70, 75, 80. Panic set in. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Child locks. I realized with a sinking feeling. I was trapped. "Please," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Just let me out. I won't tell anyone, I swear." John laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweetheart, we're way past that now." I looked out the window, trying to get my bearings, but all I could see was darkness, punctuated by the occasional blur of a road sign. We were far from the highway now, on some back road I didn't recognize. My mind raced, trying to remember all those self-defense tips I'd read online but never really paid attention to. Go for the eyes, kick the groin. But how was I supposed to do any of that from the passenger seat of a speeding truck? As if reading my mind, John spoke again. "Don't even think about trying anything. You're not going anywhere until I say so." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. I needed to stay alert, to look for any opportunity to escape. We drove for what felt like hours, the landscape outside growing more and more desolate. Finally, the truck slowed, turning onto a dirt road that led into a dense forest. This was it, I realized with a sickening jolt. Whatever he had planned for me, it was going to happen here. The truck rolled to a stop in a small clearing. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, John turned to face me. "End of the line, Sarah," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Time to get out." I shook my head, pressing myself back against the seat. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." His face hardened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He reached for me, his hand closing around my arm in a vice-like grip. In that moment, something in me snapped. All the fear, all the anger, All the helplessness I'd been feeling coalesced into a surge of desperate energy. As he pulled me towards him, I lashed out with everything I had. My nails raked across his face, drawing blood. He yelled, more in surprise than pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to yank my arm free. I threw myself at the door, fumbling with the handle. By some miracle, it opened. He must have unlocked it to drag me out. I tumbled onto the ground, scraping my knees and palms on the rough dirt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I scrambled to my feet and ran, plunging into the darkness of the forest. Behind me, I could hear John cursing, the truck door slamming. The beam of a flashlight cut through the trees, searching. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead. But terror kept me moving. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. All I knew was that I had to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as possible. Finally, when I felt like I couldn't take another step, I allowed myself to stop. I leaned against a tree, gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. Nothing, just the quiet sounds of the forest at night. I slid down to the ground, my back against the rough bark, and let the tears come. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I was alive. I had escaped. But I was lost in the middle of nowhere, with no idea where I was, and a madman potentially still looking for me. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation set in. I was dressed for a job interview, not a trek through the wilderness. My thin blazer did little to ward off the chill of the night air. My feet, clad in sensible but not wilderness-appropriate flats, were already aching and blistered. But I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to find help. I forced myself to my feet, wincing at the pain. Picking a direction at random, away from where I thought the clearing was, I started walking. The forest seemed endless. Every tree looked the same in the darkness. I stumbled frequently, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. More than once, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, causing me to freeze in terror. But it was always just the wind in the leaves, or some small animal scurrying away. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A break in the trees ahead. I quickened my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. I emerged from the forest onto the shoulder of a road. It was narrow and empty, but it was civilization. I could have cried with relief. I didn't know which way to go, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I picked a direction and started walking, my thumb out in case any early morning drivers passed by. It was over an hour before I saw headlights approaching. I waved frantically, praying it wasn't John, that I hadn't somehow walked in a circle back to where I started. The car slowed, then stopped. An older couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance. I shook my head, tears welling up again. "No," I managed to choke out. "I need help. Please." They ushered me into the back seat, wrapping me in a blanket they had stashed there. As we drove toward the nearest town, I haltingly explained what had happened, leaving out the worst details. The couple exchanged worried glances. "We need to get you to the police," the man said, reaching for his phone. I nodded, finally feeling safe for the first time in hours. The next few days were a blur of police statements, hospital checks, and tearful reunions with family and friends. John was never found. The truck had been stolen, the license plate swapped. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I know I'm lucky. I know it could have been so much worse. But the fear lingers. I jump at unexpected noises. I can't bring myself to get into a car with a stranger. The forest, once a place I loved, now fills me with dread. But I'm healing, slowly. I'm reclaiming my life piece by piece, and I'm sharing my story, hoping it might help someone else stay safe. Because the scariest part of all of this, it started just like any other night. It could have happened to anyone. So please, be careful out there. Trust your instincts, and never, ever assume it can't happen to you. Because sometimes, the difference between a routine drive and a nightmare is just one broken down car on a lonely road